harrowing moments for members of Congress who were practicing for an upcoming charity baseball game, and they were struck by gunfire. The gunfire came from the third base side, according to Senator Flake, and the bullets were kind of blowing dirt around, but also hitting at least 4 people, potentially 5, who were taken away from the scene. Representative Steve Scalise was among those hit. President Trump said on Twitter that he is going to make a full recovery. A staff member, a lobbyist, a member of Scalise's security detail, also among those shot and wounded. And a suspect is in custody. The Alexandria Police Department said there is no longer a threat, but they refuse to provide any additional details. ABC's Kenneth Moten is on scene in Alexandria, Virginia, at that park. Kenneth?
Aaron, let me set the scene for you. We've got yellow tape all around this baseball field right now where those GOP members who were practicing this morning. I can see a police chopper in the air right now. I've got sheriff's deputies, police officers surrounding this location right now, even though this happened, a couple of hours ago at this point, or more than an hour ago. We still have a very large police presence and a police scene here. There are obviously a large number of media here right now. I was just actually speaking with a witness who was just yards away from the baseball field when that shooting started. Aaron, bear with me. I'm going to walk over to Mr. Nathan right now. Hi, sir. I'm sorry. We're live on ABC News Radio. Can you just play through exactly what you told me about what you heard, what you saw? You were just walking your dog.
Well, the dog park. I was going to the dog park. Yeah, so the dog park is right next to the baseball field. And so I was walking into the dog park when I heard the first shot. Didn't know it was a shot at the time. And then I heard the second one, and I looked around and saw people starting to scatter. And so I realized it was shots, and I just laid flat and then was holding on to my dogs because I didn't get a chance to close the gate behind me to get into the dog park. And then after a couple shots, I realized that there was some trash cans there that would give me a little more protection, like about 5 feet away. So I scrambled over there. And then instead of, and then I was like, oh, there's nothing I could do. I'm pretty much stuck here. So I got my camera phone out. Like, oh, let me try and record it. Maybe something worthwhile can come out of this.
What went through your mind when you heard those shots, and how many did you hear?
There was a lot. I mean, there was at least 30. I've heard somebody say 50 or plus, but there was a lot. And then I was pissed off. It's like, you hear everything about gun control, but who knows who this guy is? Who knows what his agenda is? Is he just a mental case, or I don't know. But yeah, I was pissed off, and I was like, well, let me just report it. Maybe they can get some kind of information from it.
Again, speaking with Noah Nathan here live on ABC News Radio, where you heard those shots as those GOP members were practicing baseball. This is the dog park you come to. You say you see those lawmakers there for years now.
Yeah, well, I've only been here a year, but they're here every day practicing for the baseball game, for the congressional baseball game.
When you finally heard some of the details coming out of this, the fact that lawmakers were targeted, what went through your mind? What were your thoughts?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what this guy's agenda is. It sounds like he came here for the congressman, so it wasn't just some random shooting.
I asked you earlier, was this a sign of, the times, the divisive nature of Washington, what's happening in this country right now?
I think it'd be more of a mental issue. Guys, maybe a mental case. I mean, everything is bad, and everybody's trying to make it seem so divisive, but a normal, rational person's not going to go and open fire on people.
You said you hit the ground, but you were still able to see some things. Obviously, there were Capitol Police who were on the scene. So did you see them?
Right, yeah. There was, I don't know, particular. Somebody was shooting back right away, and then several minutes later, the police came.
You also heard some of the, now we know GOP members yelling out as well. What did you hear from them?
Right. Well, first they were just going to run away. They wanted to make sure somebody's called 911. And when the police came or whatever, they were ordering the guy. They were saying, put your gun down. And they were saying, just shoot him. Don't worry about that. Just shoot him. Get him down because he's been, he's shooting at us. He shot some of their teammates.
So the players, the GOP members, were actually yelling at Capitol Police to shoot back.
Yeah. Well, they were shooting back, but I guess they were trying to say, put your gun down. And they were just like, don't waste your time doing that. Just keep shooting.
What was the aftermath like? After they got the shooter in custody, after it seemed a little bit more control, what was that like?
Relief. Yeah, so after all the shooting stopped, then we were able to get up and then look around, trying to realize, okay, what just happened and who's hurt? Because there was the congressman you could see out laying in the outfield, he was shot pretty early, and couldn't really tell if he was moving or not. And so as soon as everything stopped, they ran out to assist him, and then they were able to medevac him out.
As a person who lives around Washington, everybody is pretty much tuned into Capitol Hill. We know lawmakers. Your thoughts about the Majority Whip, Scalise, who was shot in the hip, non-life-threatening injury, we're told. Your thoughts when you know that there's pretty much essentially a big Washington player in the line of leadership was injured on this baseball field that you live right next to?
Well, just the fact that anybody was shot. I mean, Republican, Democrat, who cares? I mean, if you're somebody running the government, it's just not right. It's a democracy.
Well, thank you again. I know you said you ducked for cover. Your dogs are okay. You're okay. And thank you again for speaking with ABC News Radio Live. Sure. Thank you. Aaron, that's just a little bit of a witness who, heard the shots, jumped on the ground. He was walking his dogs. He saw the aftermath. He heard the screams. He heard the yells of these Republican Congress members who were on this baseball field. I'm actually getting a little closer to this field. I'm in the outfield section right now where I can see just on the road surrounding this baseball field, just tons of police cars, fire trucks. The lights are still on. Here I see like baseballs just scattered all over the pitcher's mound of this field right here. I see yellow, crime scene tape. I know that from our reporting that we think that this gunman was positioned somewhere behind third baseman, behind a fence there as he was shooting onto the field. And we understand that the Majority Whip, Representative Scalise from Louisiana, we understand that he was standing on the second base. And as another member of Congress described it this morning, that he was pretty much a sitting duck. And so as I walk around this field, I see detectives who were just processing, and crime scene investigators are also processing this scene right now. So still a very active scene as police investigate this shooting. Again, non-life-threatening injuries for the congressman, but just some scary moments from the people who were around this area because it's a dog park. It was before the temperatures really got heated here in Washington, but still a very warm day and a warm morning. And so people were getting out early, walking their dogs. You heard Mr. Nathan there saying, I'm just walking my dog to the dog park. And then this happened. And so just some scary moments from the people all around, Aaron.
ABC's Kenneth Moton on scene in Alexandria, Virginia, where at least 4 people have been shot, 5 transported from a baseball field where Republican members of Congress were practicing for their upcoming charity baseball game scheduled for tomorrow. To bring you up to date, as Kenneth describes that active investigation, Alexandria police say this is also stable and there is no longer a threat because the suspect has been taken into custody. Representative Steve Scalise, the Republican whip who was shot, is said to be making a full recovery, according to a tweet from President Trump. Vice President Pence canceled a speech that he was scheduled to deliver this hour, and otherwise the White House is keeping tabs on the recovery of the congressional staffer, the Capitol Police officer, and lobbyist who were also hit. The staffer was from Representative Roger Williams. He was okay, but a member of his staff was shot and is receiving medical attention. The congressman also noted that the gunman has been detained. No further information about a motive. But I want to turn to ABC News consultant John Cowan, formerly of the Department of Homeland Security. It does appear that this was a targeted act against members of Congress. What are we learning so far, John, that speaks to you about what the motive might be?
So that's right, Aaron. It certainly sounds like from the reporting that the individual who carried out this act of targeted violence was knew that these were members of Congress and was shooting at them. So what investigators will look at now is, was he seeking specifically to harm Representative Scalise and others individually, or was he trying to make a statement by simply targeting members of Congress more generally? And again, that will come. Police will learn about that through their interviews of the individual, by conversations that they're having with people who know the individual, and other information they acquire through their investigation.
We've heard through law enforcement sources that there is no nexus to terrorism, perhaps the way we think of it, Islamic extremism. But what about domestic terrorism? Are those kinds of people taking their cues from ISIS or whatever else may be out there?
Yeah, to me, as someone who has been involved in law enforcement and counterterrorism for 32 years, we can no longer sort of make the blanket statements that this is not related to terrorism, in that those statements, what they really mean is that the attack is not related to an international terrorist group. What we're seeing today in our country is increasingly individuals who are either inspired by what they see on the internet or who, because of some underlying mental health issue, form a violent response to some perceived grievance, carrying out mass casualty attacks in furtherance of those two motivating factors. And we're seeing an increase in workplace shootings. We're seeing an increase in shootings occurring directed at soft targets. But the underlying motive behind all of these shootings is an increase in violent behavior by people with underlying mental health issues who either become inspired by terrorist ideologies that they see on the internet or who are acting out in furtherance of some perceived grievance.
ABC's John Cowan, our consultant, formerly of the Department of Homeland Security. At least 4 people have been shot at a congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia. 5 people have been transported from the scene, including the Republican whip Steve Scalise, who is said to be shot in the hip. He will make a full recovery, according to a tweet from President Trump. A staff member for another congressman, Representative Roger Williams, was also among those shot, as was a Capitol police officer there providing the security for the majority whip. Steve Scalise was the only member there receiving security because of his elevated position in Congress. Otherwise, it was just the congressmen and their baseball gloves as the shots rang out from the third base side of this field. According to eyewitnesses, the dirt was scattering and members of Congress hit the deck. Steve Scalise, members said, was standing around second base just into the outfield when he was shot in the hip. Members ran to him to try to tend to him. We heard from Senator Jeff Flake that he grabbed his phone and called Scalise's wife to let her know what was going on before he was taken away from the scene by ambulance. Another member of Congress who was there is Ohio Republican Brad Renstrup. He spoke just a moment ago to ABC's George Stephanopoulos.
Well, I was just going in the batting cage and I heard a gunshot, and then we heard several more, and I saw Steve Scalise was down around second base. So I was down along the right field line. Everyone hit the deck and started scurrying for cover. Fortunately, there is a security detail with Mr. Scalise, or otherwise we would have had no one there, unfortunately, to protect us. But they were there, and so they were able to return fire. But he was very crafty. He was behind the third base dugout on the outfield side, firing towards third base and second base, and then he moved to the more infield side of the dugout and was firing. And he kept mobile. And then he went around behind a building that's behind home plate and was firing a rifle, the same rifle, it seems, from there, and went back around the building and at some point came out with a pistol, and that's when the security detail was able to take him down. When it appeared they had him down, I ran out onto the field with Jeff Flake to Steve and did what I did in Iraq, and you assess their wounds and you cut down their clothes and look for the wound and make sure that you stop the bleeding. And then when the medics got there, we were able to bandage him more appropriately, made sure that Steve was conscious, and we started giving him as much fluid as we could through Gatorade and water.
So
he was losing a lot of blood.
He was conscious all the time you were with him?
Yes, and I was testing Steve, count to 5, things like that, just to make sure, Steve, you know where you are, the baseball field. So he was conscious the whole time. He was noticeably in pain, and of course we tried not to move him very much to minimize any further injury.
We just heard a report that Congressman DeSantis said that before the gunman opened fire, he had heard him ask, are these Democrats or Republicans? Did you hear anything at all from the shooter? Could you hear him saying anything?
I was too far away to hear him say anything, but the report was that one of the members left practice a little early, and someone approached him saying, are these Republicans or Democrats? And he said, these are Republicans, and that was the end of the conversation. There's a lot of people that walk around this ballpark, walk their dogs out exercising in the morning, and so it's not uncommon to have people gathering around, but we certainly weren't expecting something like this.
Yeah, this is a place you had been practicing pretty regularly, right?
Yeah, for years this is where we practice, and it's early in the morning, and we start around 6:30 in the morning, and so you really don't expect it to be a time of day that But, today it seems like anything will happen. It's a sad day.
It is such a sad day, and thank goodness you were able to get there and treat
George
the congressman
Stephanopoulos,
so
our
quickly.
colleague, speaking to Brad Wenstrup, the Republican of Ohio. Important, as you heard George describe a different congressman saying that he heard someone ask whether it was Republicans or Democrats. There's been no confirmation that that was actually the shooter trying to make a distinction. Suspicion is that was a passing jogger who may have just asked, these the Republicans or the Democrats. The Democrats had been on the field earlier, and still no potential motive has been released by police for why this shooting happened. But it does increasingly appear as if these members were targeted for whatever reason, and the authorities still haven't said. But this morning, according to House Speaker Paul Ryan, the hearts of the whole House are with Steve Scalise, the Republican whip, the brave Capitol Police, staff, and all those who are in harm's way. A tweet a moment ago from House Speaker Ryan after the Republican whip, Steve Scalise, and at least 4 others were shot, including a staff member for another congressman, a lobbyist, and a member of the Capitol Police Department. 5 people were transported from the scene. We know of at least 4 who were shot. So we're still waiting to hear more definitively from police who the victims are, what their conditions are. So far, all we know is that Scalise, according to a tweet from President Trump, is expected to make a full recovery. ABC's Kenneth Moten is standing by live at the scene in Alexandria, Virginia. Kenneth.
Aaron, again, yes, I'm standing right outside this baseball field right now to set the scene for you here. This place is surrounded by homes. We have an apartment home just across the way there. We have a residential street that's just right across the street where there are houses. There's another apartment complex. To my right here, there is a school playground. So as you mentioned, we mentioned the dog park earlier. Across the street from this baseball field, Kendra and Scott live there. They were right there when they heard the gunshots. Kendra, describe what you heard and what was going through you at the time.
Yeah, so I was outside with the dogs, and it sounded like construction at first, and like a big sort of boom, and then all of a sudden it sounded like fireworks, rapid fire. We were outside with the dogs, and Scott said, get inside, and we kind of sheltered a little bit in the backyard. And people were coming, running, saying, it sounds like a war zone, and he was trying to get on the phone with 911. It was just very, very scary and surreal to understand what was happening at the time.
Kendra, how long have you lived across the street from this baseball field?
Just about a year.
It's about a year. You've seen the congressman out here before practicing?
I have not. I mean, we see people practicing in ball games and kids and families around here all the time, but I did not know that this was a practice field for the congressional baseball game.
Scott, Kendra told me earlier that obviously you moved pretty fast. She said you were the person who was pretty much the peace and the calm in that chaotic moment. How would you describe it?
That's very sweet. No, it was, it was disconcerting. I mean, like I had told others, the first shot, I had hoped it was a piece of construction equipment, but after that, I mean, it was a volley of gunshots. It was clearly a firefight. And, sure, I mean, my main concern was for her safety and for everyone else's safety, and there were people running back and just imploring them to move quickly or get down. As you can clearly see by the gunshots through the front of the YMCA, bullets, they'll keep going until something stops them. And obviously, with everyone around here and so many homes, so many kids, getting down and sheltering is imperative.
Describe this neighborhood to me. As I mentioned, playground right there, dog park here, the beautiful scenic Alexandria neighborhood here. Obviously, this was a surprise to you to have this. You're still holding your morning coffee here, and probably just woke up an hour before all of this started.
Around that.
And just your thoughts about this neighborhood and obviously something like this playing out in your home.
Well, Alexandria is such a wonderful city, and if Alexandria is that wonderful, I think Del Rey really is kind of the jewel of Alexandria, at least in my opinion. I've been here for almost 15 years. This is, to say this is an anomaly is an understatement. We all walk around here freely, day and night, at any hour. This neighborhood is as safe as you can get. This is a neighborhood full of truly neighbors. Everybody's your friend. Everybody's your family. Delray residents will do anything for anybody. This is atypical, to say the least. I've never seen anything like this here, heard anything like this around here. Certainly not even in the city of Alexandria. This is different and disconcerting.
Scott, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Aaron, just some of the sights and sounds just from folks here who were right there when those gunshots started.
ABC's Kenneth Moten with us from the park in Alexandria, Virginia, where 4 people were shot. The gunman also wounded and taken to the hospital. Stay with us. This is live coverage from ABC News. I'm Aaron Katersky. 4 people have been shot and wounded at a congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia, where police said the shooter is in custody and was also transported to the hospital. Among those hit, Representative Steve Scalise, the Republican majority whip. He is said to be making a full recovery in the hospital, according to a tweet from President Trump. Vice President Pence canceled a speech he was to give this hour, and he has returned to the White House or is on his way there as the White House continues to monitor. A staff member for a different Republican congressman was among the victims, as was a member of the U.S. Capitol Police. They're providing security for Representative Scalise because he is the Republican majority whip. Other members of Congress do not get a security detail. We're told a lobbyist may have been the other victim that had been shot. No word on who the suspect is, what the motive might have been, but with the presence of the FBI, the ATF, and others on scene, you get the sense that this was somehow a targeted attack for whatever reason on members of Congress who were practicing for an annual charity baseball game. This was a Republican practice. The Democrats had taken the field earlier in the morning, and this was known in the community as the field where the members of Congress practice. There had been a number of news accounts previewing this charity baseball game, something that had been well known in the community and a well-known location for members of Congress to be early in the morning before the workday started. ABC's Arlette Saenz covers the Capitol for us, now guarded by a heavier than normal police presence.
That's right. The Capitol Police said that they were going to deploy a stronger presence around the Capitol complex. The Capitol complex, the office buildings, and the actual Capitol itself are still open, but expect to see a stronger presence at the entrances and just generally around. They have to be a little bit more careful and safe, especially given what happened this morning.
No indication that any other members of Congress are in any danger, that the Capitol is being targeted or any other government institution, but it does appear that at this baseball field in Alexandria, Virginia, the shooter may have known that the members were going to be there practicing. I want to turn to John Cowan, our consultant formerly of the Department of Homeland Security. John, as you look at the shooter's movements and what eyewitnesses said he had with him, what does that suggest to you? There seemed to have been some kind of long gun and a handgun.
Yeah, so if I can go back to something you were just talking about, Aaron, you mentioned that it was well known to members of the community that this was the members of Congress were practicing at this field at this time. That'll be an important fact, because investigators will want to know, was the shooter targeting members of Congress specifically, or was he just targeting a group of people who were on the field? The reports we're hearing that he had possibly multiple weapons, a long gun, I think somebody described it as a semi-automatic type weapon, and a handgun. That suggests some prior preparation in a sense, and it would sort of, as an investigator, would cause me to question whether this was just something that happened on impulse, a guy walking down the street with, carrying a handgun and then decides to start shooting at people. So he had to have the forethought to bring 2 guns with him or more guns. The third point is we've heard some reports about his changing of position, staying behind cover and changing positions while engaged in a shooting. Somebody who has no prior training or no prior planning, would probably just walk on the field and start shooting people. This individual seemed to have at least some experience in cover concealment and movement while conducting the shooting. So that's something investigators will look at as well.
John Cowan, formerly of the Department of Homeland Security, now an ABC News consultant, with his impressions of the shooter. Although his identity is not known, he is in custody. He was wounded by Capitol Police and taken to the hospital, according to the police department in Alexandria, Virginia, which is saying now that the scene is stable. There is no longer a threat, but it is still very much an active investigation, as eyewitnesses have described a number of shots fired, dozens perhaps, and so they're going to have to go and mark the casings. ABC's Kenneth Moten is on scene in Alexandria. Kenneth.
Aaron, just crime scene tape all around this baseball field. And something that's pretty haunting right now is an image that I'm looking at of that crime scene tape surrounding a playground where children in this neighborhood, in this Delray neighborhood in Alexandria, Virginia, play every day, especially as the temperatures are starting to heat up here as we enter the summer months. Right now, I'm looking also at a residential street where I see rows of homes just lined up here, an American flag coming out of the front porch of one home. I also looking at a United States Capitol Police vehicle. We don't know if that's a vehicle that belonged to, obviously, part of the security detail for the majority whip, or was this Capitol Police responding to the scene because some members of the detail were injured. On the other side of the baseball field, just behind the dugouts, I just see a row of police cars that are just lined up as well. Some still have their lights on. We know that detectives are on this scene. We know that Capitol Police are on this scene as well. I'm getting information because of just not only because of who it involved, but just because of how large this scene is. And now, as you mentioned, the processing has to take place as we lay this out. When I first got here more than an hour ago, there were police choppers still in the air at that moment. We've spoken with witnesses who heard those gunshots. They were just yards away because, Aaron, this is a neighborhood where people were out and about at that hour. They were walking to the dog park. They were walking to the playground. They were, starting to get out because to start their day. And so, we spoke to these witnesses who just talked about just how those gunshots just broke the morning silence there. And it was just an incredible scene as many of them ducked for cover. Many of them ran back into their homes. At this point, we know that the first gentleman that I spoke with here for ABC News Radio, Mr. Noah Nathan, he was able to get some video, either maybe slightly before or maybe right after. But we do know that police took his phone, which is very standard. If there is possibly or potentially some evidence that could be gathered, we know from dealing with investigators and law enforcement that they would want that information, they would want that video, and so they took his phone. They're talking to as many witnesses as possible as they process this scene. And so still a very active scene here. Things are stable. Things are a lot more calm than they were a couple of hours ago, of course, as people didn't know what was happening as they were either walking to the park, walking out of their homes to start their day to go to work. But definitely it's just an incredible scene, and the way it's described by the folks who heard those gunshots is just thankful, and they're thankful that obviously and surprised that more people weren't hurt because so many people were out and about already at that time, Aaron.
ABC's Kenneth Moten on scene in Alexandria, Virginia. The suspect is in custody, and the identity of the suspect and the victims have not been confirmed. However, we do know that Representative Steve Scalise, the majority whip, was among those shot, and he is, according to a tweet from President Trump, expected to make a full recovery. A moment ago, ABC's George Stephanopoulos spoke with another Republican member of Congress who was there at the time, Jack Bergman of Michigan.
It's spent 40 years in the Marines. Not the first time I heard gunfire. And standing by the batting cage when the first round rang out, everybody kind of listened, and then another one came following it shortly thereafter, and we knew it was real. Everybody just started to scramble. But from my perspective, standing right by the batting cage and hearing where the gunfire came from, I did a Marine low crawl and got behind the first base dugout to seek cover. That was my first step.
And were you able to see the shooter?
Nope, he was hidden behind the third base dugout. The only people that would have probably had a chance to see him would have been those standing out by third base or shortstop or maybe left field or second base, because he was at an angle where he was shielded from anybody that was on the from home plate to first base side initially.
And we've heard from Senator Paul and others who said that he was able to shoot for a while, anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, fairly unmolested, was able to get off a lot of rounds.
Well, because he was concealed. He was moving around. It appeared as though he was moving down the third baseline, if you will. He was outside the chain link fence because those gates are locked. And he was moving towards the backstop. So those of us who had sought cover behind the first base dugout got around the end and got into the first base dugout because the cement would at least have, deflected the rounds. And at that point, the Whip Scalise's security team was engaging, and they were coming from behind the first base dugout where their vehicle was parked outside the fence. So they were engaging him, and when it was all over, he was
Jack
down.
Bergman, a Republican congressman of Michigan, describing what he saw at the scene. This is live coverage from ABC News. I'm Aaron Katersky. At least 4 people have been shot and wounded at a congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia. The shooter is in custody and was also transported to the hospital. Eyewitnesses said the gunfire came from the third base dugout area and targeted the Republican members of Congress who were on the field practicing for their upcoming charity game against the Democrats who had been on the field earlier in the morning. This was a known location where members of Congress practice, raising the question whether this shooter targeted these members. The reason may not be clear. Was he targeting Republicans? Was he targeting congressional members? Was he targeting Congressman Steve Scalise, the Republican whip from Louisiana, who was shot in the hip and wounded? President Trump said on Twitter that he will make a full recovery. A moment ago, we heard from House Speaker Paul Ryan on Twitter saying that the entire House is thinking of these members and staffers who were there. Congressman Kevin McCarthy had said that we have once again witnessed the bravery of the Capitol Police. An officer was shot in the leg, we're told, and may also have simultaneously been engaging the shooter, who was shot and wounded and also taken to the hospital. We are awaiting additional updates to give you firm identities and conditions. None of the injuries, though, is said to be life-threatening, but certainly this was a frightening moment for people who live and work in the area. Many were out on a beautiful early morning in the Washington, D.C. area, walking dogs or going for a jog. Members of Congress were practicing for their upcoming charity baseball game. ABC's Kenneth Moten is at the scene and with us live. Kenneth.
Aaron, and as you mentioned, this neighborhood here that is just filled with families. I'm actually walking right now. I was earlier just outside of the outfield of the baseball field where I could see that the crime scene tape that was obviously just surrounding that baseball field. Well, as I walk right now, I'm walking into a very large crowd of not only media, but maybe possibly I see them surrounding someone who's possibly giving an update. So I'm definitely rushing over to get that right now. What we see here is just rows of homes. Just on this beautiful morning, it's about 80 degrees here in Washington. We know in the past few days we've had a heat wave, and people have wanted to get out as early as possible, which is pretty typical, pretty normal. And so around that baseball field, you have a dog park, you have a playground, and school is out this week in the area here in Alexandria, Virginia. And so we know that there were a number of people who were out and about. Those witnesses who I spoke with earlier, they said that it was just like they heard that gunfire. They can't even recall how many gunshots they heard, but they know that it was a chaotic moment as they tried to duck for cover. One man who had his dogs, who was walking his dogs, he literally fell onto the ground and also tried to cover his dogs. And so, Aaron, as I'm walking up to the scene right now, in another portion of just outside of that baseball field, there's just a crush of media right now. People, looks like neighbors who are standing around, who are shocked. This is their quiet Delray neighborhood. This is not something they suspected at this moment. All right, and as I get closer to the scene, I just see this crush of media. They're not getting an update at this point. Obviously, with me, with so many of our resources here, we're just trying to get law enforcement on camera, on the record, on live here on radio, where we can get as much information as possible on what they have learned about that gunman who, again, is in custody. At least 4 people shot. And it's an incredible scene right now where on this street here, on Monroe Avenue, which is the address for the baseball field on the 400 block of East Monroe Avenue in Alexandria, we just see just tons of law enforcement officers. And I'm actually looking at right now, I see ATF is on the scene. So we, of course, with this being in the neighborhood of Washington, D.C., of our nation's capital, this involving GOP members of Congress, lawmakers, we see Capitol Police. We see a large number of federal officers who are on this scene right now to help also the local officials who are part of this investigation as well. We mentioned earlier those witnesses. Police have been talking with as many as possible to try to get obviously piece this puzzle together as they try to learn what was the motive here, who was this gunman truly after. As you mentioned, Democrats were on the field earlier. So was he targeting Democrats? Was he targeting Republicans? At this point, we don't know. We just know that the shooter, the suspected gunman, is in custody at this point. And as I stand here in front of this church, Aaron, I can tell you this is an all-American community here in Alexandria, where I see the flags that are proudly displayed here in a patriotic, very patriotic neighborhood, to put it that way. And but this morning, this patriotic all-American neighborhood is surrounded by crime scene team. People are surprised, and at this point, it does not seem like a random act of violence that these people will possibly target. We are trying to confirm that at this point to make sure, but many points all indicate that this person, this gunman, possibly came here as to target the members and the people who were on that field.
ABC's Kenneth Moton in Alexandria, Virginia, where police say 4 people have been shot and wounded at a congressional baseball practice. Congressman Ron DeSantis of Florida was there at the time. Before we get to him, I do want to give you an update on House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. His office released a statement just a second ago here. He is now undergoing surgery after being shot in the hip. Representative Scalise is in stable condition, according to his office. Was in good spirits and was able to speak to his wife by phone. Steve Scalise, as Republican whip, had protection from the Capitol Police with him. Other members don't get it. And he credited the brave actions of the U.S. Capitol Police for chasing down the suspect, who was also shot and wounded and in the hospital. Now, let's go to one of his colleagues, Ron DeSantis, Republican congressman of Florida, who spoke to my colleague George Stephanopoulos a moment ago.
Yeah, so I was actually fielding ground balls at third. Jeff Duncan from South Carolina was at short. Steve was at second base. We had all hit already. Other guys were hitting. And Jeff and I just looked at each other, because D.C. traffic's terrible. We said, hey, let's just get on the road so we can get back to the hill. So that was probably 5 minutes, 10 minutes before the shot started. As we went to our car, there was an individual, middle-aged Caucasian male, that asked us, hey, is that Republicans, Democrats, what? And we're like, Republicans. And then he kind of turned and went towards the field. So I've passed along that description to the Capitol Police. Jeff has. But as soon as we saw the news, we both called each other and said, was that guy that confronted us? It was just an odd confrontation. So some of these things you just kind of clicks. And so we both provided that. But this is a wide open field. I mean, it's a community field. People can show up. They can sit in the bleachers. They're just like picnic table type bleachers. Him on the third base side, we all use the first base dugout. So all the coaches, staff, our equipment is all on the first base. Third base side is just kind of wide open.
You used the word confronted. What was his manner?
It was just weird. We were in the car, and he kind of like walked over to us and asked us that. Again, I definitely didn't think he was going to, if it even is the same guy, we don't know that yet.
Was he wearing a blue shirt?
I think he was, but I'm not 100% sure. It was, I kind of saw him more from the chest up, because I was in the back seat of the car by then, and he kind of talked to Jeff in the passenger side. But it was just the type of thing, you kind of think about, then you shrug, and then as soon as this happened, Jeff and I both called each other and said, man, we got to pass along that description. So, and there's not a lot, I mean, George, it's in the community, so you do have people who walk their dogs and all this other stuff. So it's not like there's never anybody there, but there's definitely not that many people who would actually be kind of in like the stands or anything like that who weren't. And if Steve was not there, as a member of the leadership, he gets this security detail. I mean, if he was not there, then you would have had all the staff and Congress members, and there would not have been anybody on scene who could have responded.
That would have been just terrific. One of the things, the shooter's also described as someone with dark hair. Did you get a look at his hair? Remember it?
Well, the gentleman that came to us did have dark hair. I don't know if it's the same guy, but that gentleman had dark hair. Yes, white Caucasian male with dark hair.
And in his late 40s, early 50s.
That's correct.
Ron DeSantis, a Republican congressman of Florida, speaking there with ABC's George Stephanopoulos and relating an encounter as he was leaving the baseball field with someone who asked whether there were Republicans or Democrats on the field. That person, he said, didn't have anything on him, no weapon or anything, and then just kind of marched off toward the field. He didn't know whether that was the shooter or whether it was just a passerby who inquired, but he remembered the encounter and passed along the description of the shooter to police officers because he thought it might have been important. And we'll see if, in fact, it was indeed the shooter and whether these members of Congress were targeted because they were Republicans. Stay with us as we continue our live coverage. This is live coverage from ABC News. I'm Aaron Katersky. 4 people have been shot and wounded at a congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia, including House Majority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana. We're told that he is undergoing surgery, in stable condition, in good spirits, and able to talk by phone to his wife. A staffer for another member of Congress was also among those shot. So was a member of the Capitol Police on scene because Representative Scalise is the Majority Whip and receives a security detail. We believe a lobbyist is the 4th person shot, although Alexandria police have not publicly identified the victims. The 5th person transported to the hospital is the gunman, not identified, but somebody who was engaged by Capitol Police on scene even as one of their own had been shot. And so there are a number of statements coming on Twitter from members of Congress crediting the brave actions of the Capitol Police in bringing this to an end after eyewitnesses said there were dozens of shots that rang out as members of Congress, Republicans, were on the baseball field in Alexandria, Virginia, practicing for an upcoming charity baseball game. ABC's Kenneth Moten is on the scene and with us live. Kenneth.
Aaron, just an incredible scene here right now. Yes, it is. Cowan is a stable scene here. It is a controlled scene, but we have a very large police presence. We have crime scene tape that is really blocking off many blocks away from this baseball field, even though earlier I was able to get, literally I could hang on to the back fence of the backfield, the outfield of that baseball field where those victims were shot and where those GOP members of Congress were practicing for that charity game. Right now, I'm literally standing in the middle of Monroe Avenue, just maybe good 2 blocks away from the entrance to that park or that baseball field, and I'm looking at a crush of media. Just the nation's media is all here, converged on this point in this intersection right now, where also people are trying to get more information from law enforcement. I've seen a number of ATF officers with that yellow ATF on the back of their polos, where they are starting to come onto the scene as well. We've got Capitol Police here. We've got literally just a number of unmarked vehicles with their lights on in the windshield as well. We know that a number of federal officers would respond to the scene because of the nature of it and who was involved. And so at this point, we're also still trying to find out if a number of those members who were on the baseball field, who were witnesses, are also still here giving their statements to police. Aaron, I'm also going to try to squeeze in here to hear from a man who was just yards away and heard a little bit. Bear with me here. Stand by. And we know that this man was just yards away from when those gunshots started.
I saw him he was laying down on the ground, handcuffed.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that he saw somebody behind us. So did it appear like he was moving around when he was engaging police?
There were 2 people crouched behind, or one person crouched behind a black SUV, and he was exchanging fire with the suspect over the hood of the car. He had a handgun. I saw one individual lying between the wheels behind the vehicle, lying on the ground.
What's your name?
Owen Britton.
Owen?
Yes. Britton.
All right, Owen Britton is an eyewitness there in the scrum with ABC's Kenneth Moten in Alexandria, Virginia, where members of Congress were practicing for an upcoming charity baseball game when shots rang out. Eyewitnesses described a number of shots from some kind of long gun followed by a handgun. And I want to bring ABC's Steve Gomez, our law enforcement consultant, formerly of the FBI, into the conversation. Steve, couple of things that stick out. Having two guns and description from eyewitnesses that the shooter may have moved around and occasionally paused to take cover. That suggests a degree of either planning or training or both.
Absolutely. It definitely shows some kind of planning, multiple weapons. They also talked about how he had a lot of ammunition. And there was also one statement that they heard him reloading. So that clearly shows that he came prepared to wreak havoc. I mean, he was going to shoot a lot of bullets and try to kill as many people as possible, because that's what you do when you have that kind of ammunition. The movements that usually indicate some kind of training, maybe a former military veteran, somebody who's been in the military, or somebody who has gotten some type of training, doesn't necessarily mean they had to be in the military. They could have been somebody who goes out in the woods and hunts and does paintball training. We've seen that happen many times before. So that would indicate those types of details. And I got to tell you, Aaron, one thing that's sticking out of my mind, just based on his description, his age, and so on, and we'll have to find out more from the investigation, but this is the kind of profile, just with the brief details we have, that would fit an anarchist, some kind of anti-government type of person, some of the militias that we've seen over the last couple of decades, where somebody who is anti-U.S. government, and then they want to commit some type of attack on, say, congressmen or a government building and so on.
Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News consultant, as Alexandria police continue to pick up shell casings and investigate what happened at a baseball field earlier this morning when shots rang out as Republican members of Congress were practicing for their upcoming charity game against the Democrats who were on the field earlier in the day. This was a location that had been known to members of the public. A number of articles had been written recently about members getting ready for this charity game, publicizing where they would be practicing. They've been on that same field practicing for this annual game for a number of years. Congressman Stephen Palazzo of Mississippi was not there at the time, but he spoke to a number of members who were, and he himself spoke a moment ago to ABC's George Stephanopoulos.
That's correct. I had a previous engagement on the calendar, so I wasn't going to be at practice this morning. But I have had the opportunity to talk to some of my colleagues, and I just have to say, I mean, we are shocked. The mood is very somber, and there's just a general state of disbelief that this has actually happened.
Yeah, it's such a scary thing to have happen, and actually so fortunate for the members there. So far, we're hearing that Steve Scalise and others are likely to be okay, but had his security detail not been there, this could have been far worse.
No doubt about it, George. If it wasn't for Steve Scalise not being there, if it wasn't for him being, if he wasn't there, his security detail wouldn't have been there, and there would have been nothing standing between members, staff, innocent bystanders, and this gunman. It could have been a horrific scene, and so I'm just praying to God that the Capitol Police, our heroes, were there today.
Had you all as members of Congress been given any kind of warnings recently for incidents like this, any kind of increased concern, or not really?
No, I haven't seen any security alerts. When we travel and do public events in the district, I mean, it just becomes second nature that we try to alert our law enforcement partners in the communities. But you never expect this to happen to you. It's always, it happens to the other guy. But up here, I mean, we're in Washington, D.C. I mean, one of the safest places on earth. And, there's a Capitol Police officer almost on every corner. And you're out in a suburb of Virginia playing baseball at 7:30 in the morning, and a shooter comes up and just starts opening fire. I mean, people never expect that. But I guess you just got to be vigilant, and you got to be aware of your situation. in our jobs that are actually becoming extremely dangerous. We just got to be aware of our surroundings and take precautions to protect our families, our staff, and ourselves.
Stephen Palazzo is a Republican member of Congress from Mississippi, speaking a moment ago there to my colleague ABC's George Stephanopoulos. As we await further information from the Alexandria police, we can tell you that the House of Representatives has canceled votes for the day and floor speeches that were to begin in just a couple of minutes' time. We know that U.S. Capitol Police has deployed around the United States Capitol as a precaution, although the scene is now contained and stable, according to Alexandria Police. The suspect was shot and wounded by Capitol Police officers who were providing security for the House Majority Whip, Steve Scalise, and Scalise is stable. He is going to make a full recovery, according to a tweet from President Trump. Scalise was also able to talk to his wife, according to a statement from his office, in good spirits, and was undergoing surgery a short while ago. We also heard that the staff member from another member of Congress, the Capitol Police officer, and a lobbyist were also among the victims. We're awaiting further details from the Alexandria Police to confirm all of the identities and to give us a sense about the shooter who had apparently come to the baseball field with two guns, a long gun and a handgun, may have paused at one point to reload and occasionally took cover behind some of the dugout structures. This is live coverage from ABC News. I'm Aaron Katursky. 4 people have been shot and wounded at a congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia. The shooter is in custody and was also transported to the hospital after he was shot and wounded by Capitol Police officers who were providing security for House Majority Whip Stephen Scalise. He was shot in the hip, in stable condition, undergoing surgery in the hospital, we're told, and in good spirits, able to talk by phone to his wife. The governor of Louisiana, where Scalise is from, has issued a statement offering his thoughts. The mayor of New Orleans has canceled an event today and will instead address what has happened to Congressman Scalise. President Trump has tweeted his thoughts. Vice President Pence has canceled a speech that he was due to give and return to the White House. The House has canceled votes for today, and Capitol Police have descended on the Capitol in greater numbers than normal to provide security, even though Alexandria Police say there is no longer a threat. The situation is stable. Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama was there on the baseball field practicing for an upcoming charity game with House Majority Whip Scalise and others who were shot, and gave his description to reporters a short time ago.
I was real close to him, 80, 90 feet away, and if he just shifted his view 20, 30 degrees to the right, then he had a clear shot at us at home plate, and I was the closest to him in that regard. At the same time that the first shots are going on, I heard a scream from Steve Scalise. I don't remember what exactly was said because there was a lot of bedlam. There were people yelling, active shooter, active shooter. There were, I think Steve Scalise was yelling, I was hit, or screaming because he got hit with the pain reaction. From there, once I realized that I was in a very bad position,
all the time you want behind the crime scene, take all the time you want.
I ran around the batting cage, which is a chain link area with a cover. It's might not be chain link, might be some kind of webbing, plastic webbing, and it's got a 4-foot-high blue plastic around it, so at least the shooter can't shoot you anymore or see you.
Sure.
I ran behind that to the first base side, and then lied down, hit the dirt, along with some other congressmen or senators. I don't know who all was next to me, but there were 3 or 4 of us. And it occurred to me that if the shooter came around the third base dugout, then he would have us 10 to 15 feet away lying on the ground, an easy shot. And so while he was still shooting, I made the decision that it was probably a smarter thing to do to take a chance of getting shot while running. Ran to the first base dugout, dove in, as did the other people who were with me. Then hit the deck in the dugout.
Left of the cop car, left of the police
In the dugout, there are a dozen or so people. Some are on their cell phones screaming that we have an active shooter and that we need assistance. I see that one of our staff members has a bullet hole in his leg and his calf.
I take off my belt, and myself and another gentleman, and I don't remember who it was, applies the belt as a tourniquet to his leg to staunch. Now, in fairness, that staffer, he was gutsy. He was saying it wasn't bad at all, but I mean, there was a hole in his leg. So we put on the tourniquet despite his remarks. Laid down on the dugout floor again. Shortly thereafter, just loud explosions. And I look up, and there's a guy with a gun about 5 feet above me shooting. And at first, you don't know if that's the second shooter, but it turned out to be one of our guys shooting back, risking themselves, giving us protection. When I say risking themselves, when you're shooting 90 to 100 feet away, one guy's got a rifle and you've got a pistol, that's not a fair fight. So at this point in time, both of our Capitol Police, the security detail that was there with us, is engaging the shooter and I think trying to pin him down behind the third base dugout. At some point or another, he goes around the third base dugout towards home plate where he's taken down. And if we had stayed behind that batting cage, we'd have been 10 or 15 feet from him, prone on the ground, easy targets. So, but for the grace of God and the aim of those shooters, our Capitol Police officers shooting back, I'd be with Steve Scalise in a hospital someplace, along with some of our other people. And if you'd gotten to our dugout, there were another dozen or so of us. Senator Jeff Flake was there. I can't keep track of who all was there. It was kind of bedlam. It could have been really bad. And our two Capitol Police, both were wounded. Again, rifle against a pistol. And they risked themselves and sacrificed themselves in the line of duty protecting us.
Did you hear the gunman
feel like
say
they
anything?
were targeting you? I mean, did you have a sense that they came here because you guys were playing?
Well, it was one person.
Right.
It's a Republican baseball practice, United States congressman. I cannot imagine him going there for any other reason than to try to kill as many congressmen as he could.
Congressman, have you been worried about the atmosphere of violence? We've seen Kathy Griffith with the beheaded head of Donald Trump. We've seen Snoop Dogg shoot the president. Does this concern you, this media environment?
We in the United States Congress have always been high-profile targets. The president, of course, is the highest-profile target of the terrorists and the bad guys. But you saw what happened with 9/11. A lot of people in the Washington, D.C. area who help the United States government function, we understand we're high-profile targets. Kathy Giffords drove that home when she was shot and some other people were killed in Arizona. We've had other kinds of threats that occur on a regular basis. I've had my name on the internet with a bounty, if you shoot me and some other congressman. And so we understand the risk. It goes with the job, and you do what you can to try not only to protect yourself, but those who are with you. Typically speaking, congressmen and senators cannot protect themselves that much because normally if there's a shooter, you're the first target. But what you need to do is make sure that you have law enforcement available so that after the gunman has shot you or the senator, depending on who's presiding over the event, that the law enforcement officials who are there can prevent others from having their lives lost, as was the case with Kathy Giffords and I'm sorry? Gabby. My bad. I'm sorry. I'm still a little bit emotional. With Gabby Giffords having been shot in Arizona where, the second, third, and fourth, and fifth shots, well, there are a lot of them. If we'd had better law enforcement protection, then the casualties probably would have been less. So that's what we need.
You say you're high profile, but
did you see the guy? Did he say anything? Did the man
I never
say
heard
anything?
it. I never heard him say anything. He didn't say anything before he was shot. Before he started shooting, I never heard him say anything. And after the shooting started, what I heard primarily were gunshots, rifle shots and gunshots, and a lot of hollering.
And there were kids
Congressman, you talk about security being high
that
profile. Most people at home don't recognize that you guys don't have a full.
Like here on the East Coast, if you're just joining us
that
on the
is
West Coast.
Representative Mo Brooks speaking a moment ago to reporters on scene. The Republican congressman from Alabama describing those harrowing moments when dozens and dozens of shots rang out from a long gun and a handgun that the shooter was carrying. There has been no specific motive, but you heard Congressman Brooks say he believes there was no other reason to be there other than to target those who were practicing for an upcoming charity baseball game, the annual Democrats versus Republicans baseball game supposed to be tomorrow night at Nationals Park. U.S. Capitol Police have provided what they're calling robust security at the Capitol building as members arrive for work. The building is open, and we just heard a moment ago that the House would cancel all votes today. President Trump has canceled a speech he was scheduled to give a little later this afternoon. Vice President Pence canceled one this morning and returned to the White House. And the business of Washington really is becoming secondary to the expressions of condolence and thought that being given to House Majority Whip Steve Scalise and others who were shot, including a staff member for another congressman, a lobbyist, and a member of the Capitol Police Department, we believe, who also simultaneously engaged the shooter. The shooter was shot and wounded, and that is why Alexandria police say there is no longer any kind of a threat. The Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is on the scene tracing the long gun and the handgun that were recovered there to try to give them a sense of where those weapons may have been obtained, whether they were legal or not, and whether there was some kind of connection to a group. Again, all of that is under investigation. Once they determine who the shooter is, they'll look at social media. Let's bring in Steve Gomez, in fact, a former FBI agent, now an ABC News consultant. How do you begin to trace who this guy is and what the motive here may have been?
Well, it starts with you got a lot of witnesses out there, so it starts at the field. We know who the person is, so we're going to dig into his background. We're going to figure out who he is, what he's been doing, not just in the last week or month, but going back in life. What are his jobs, the type of employment he's had, where does he live, where has he lived? Was he in the military? Was he doing anything where he received some type of training with firearms, with tactical movement, as looks like we saw there at the field? They're going to be tracing the firearms. They're going to be tracing the ammo. Where did he purchase all of this? They definitely are going to be concerned to see if he operated alone or did he get some assistance with this attack. What is his political affiliations, his motive? That's one of the biggest things that we haven't really seen yet, because it's just an early stage of the investigation. But if he was the person who asked, whether it was Republican or Democrat practice out there in the field, then you have to start to wonder, is that part of the motive? Was that something where he's a Democrat and wanted to target Republicans, or was he just somebody who's anti-government? The Republicans are in charge of the government right now, so that could be the reason for why he wanted to commit this attack, that he views that they are the ones in charge. He's anti-U.S. government, if that is the case, and therefore he's going to commit that kind of attack on these congressmen and women and the people that are out there. So those are the things that they're going to be looking for, but they're really going to focus on, him, his background, who he's associated with, and start to figure out what was going on in his mind.
ABC News consultant Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI. The FBI is among the agencies on scene in Alexandria, Virginia, investigating after shots rang out at a congressional baseball practice where Republican members of Congress were getting ready for a charity game against the Democrats tomorrow at Nationals Park in Washington, D.C. Alexandria police said a suspect was taken into custody, hospitalized, along with the 4 people who were shot. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana said to be in stable condition after undergoing surgery for the wound on his hip, said to be in good spirits, able to talk to his wife by phone. ABC's Kenneth Moten is at the scene. He's with us live. Kenneth.
Aaron, here, as you mentioned, just a large contingent of local and federal law enforcement officers. I have been standing on that street just a few hundred yards away from the entrance to that baseball park, where I just see ATF, I see Capitol Police, FBI, as you mentioned, on this scene right now. Also with the Alexandria police. There's just a number of law enforcement folks who are here to help with this large-scale investigation. Yes, one suspected gunman, but what we see here is just a massive undertaking where I see crime scene tape just surrounding that baseball field where those GOP members of Congress were practicing for that charity game. Obviously, because of the nature of what happened, who the victims were, let's be honest, it is a large scene. It is a scene that where you're going to have a large contingent of federal law enforcement officers, especially Capitol Police, because they were involved. You heard those heroic acts. We've just heard incredible descriptions of how it all played out once those gunshots were fired, where you heard a member of the Majority Whip's detail was literally on the ground shooting back. We heard from witnesses that there were GOP members of Congress, those players who were on the field, who not only were scattering for cover, but they were also yelling back, taking down, screaming for those officers to fire back, and they were. It's just some heroic acts that were happening. And surrounding that baseball field, a dog park, a playground, there were a number of residents who were out and about. I'm standing with Robert Burton, who is a member of this Delray neighborhood. Once those shots were fired, Robert, did you come outside? Walk me through what happened right after that.
Well, I'll tell you this. It was kind of intense for me because in this neighborhood, nothing like this ever happens. We were talking to some people earlier, and they say they hear things, not gunshots, not several gunshots like that. So what happened about 8 o'clock, I woke up to see this helicopter leaving the soccer field right across the street from my apartment complex. So I'm looking at, I say to myself, what the heck is going on right now? My wife calls. She's like, hey, are you watching the news? There was a shooting right across the street from your apartment. Me personally, I didn't hear gunshots, but I woke up to chaos, if you will. Looked out the window, saw the firefighters, as you mentioned, federal agents everywhere, ATF agents everywhere, sort of running around, some officers frantically running back and forth. So again, for me, this was weird. I was just talking to my wife the other day about how this is the perfect area. Nothing like this ever happened in Alexandria, especially the Delray neighborhood. Speaking live with Robert Burton here. Robert, and for our listeners, full disclosure, you are a member of the media. Yes. You are a local sportscaster for our ABC affiliate here in Washington, D.C. You're used to covering news. You're used to covering sports. The baseball field is right there, the scene of this crime. But today, you're a member of this neighborhood. You're a resident. You're somewhat of a witness of this massive scene and this crime that happened. Yeah, and it's different for me because I'm usually, as you mentioned, on the other side. I used to be in news. Like you said, I do sports now, but I was the guy who was trying to get eyewitness accounts, and I was the guy who was just trying to go around and knocking on doors and asking people what they saw. And today, that day came again. I walked outside. One of our photographers from the station was here. I went up to him and said, hey, if you need any help, I'm here for you. So we lugged the tripod, the camera, and it went around talking to people. And as I told you, they told us it was crazy. One couple said they were having coffee minutes before it happened. Went inside, said they heard gunshots. Their children were inside at the moment, and now they have to try to explain to their kids what's going on, what's happening.
Robert, what was that moment like as you spoke with your neighbors about what they saw in your community?
Well, it was sort of bone chilling, really. You kind of get chills. Stuff like this, it doesn't happen in this area. I mean, at any time of day, I could walk from here to the CVS right down the street. I'm never worried. I'm never looking around my shoulder. I'm never looking around. I don't have to worry about suspicious characters, really. I never feel that I never had that feeling walking around this area. And for them to explain what they heard and what their children had to hear was a little frightening for me.
Robert Burton there, just a eyewitness account, a man who is used to covering the news, covering sports, but today, Aaron, he's a witness.
ABC's Kenneth Moton with the eyewitnesses at the scene in Alexandria, Virginia, where authorities are not confirming any of the identities of those shot, although we do know that House Majority Whip Steve Scalise was hit in the hip, underwent surgery, said to be in good spirits and able to talk to his wife by phone. The House has canceled all votes today. The president has canceled a speech he was supposed to give. The vice president, same thing. And the governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, released a statement saying that Dorothy and I, his wife, deeply shocked and saddened by this horrible act of violence against members of Congress, law enforcement, and other innocent people who were simply enjoying an early morning baseball practice. We are expecting to hear from the governor directly a short while from now. His statement noted the quick action and bravery of the U.S. Capitol Police. They were there providing a security detail to the majority whip, Steve Scalise. He was the only one who gets such protection. Otherwise, there would have been nothing necessarily to stop the gunman's shots. And as it was, we're told that he fired off dozens of them before he was ultimately subdued by the members of Scalise's detail. And then fellow members of Congress went to Scalise's aid, including Senator Jeff Flake, who described how he tended to House Majority Whip Steve Scalise just moments ago.
Got a belt and put it around the wound and tried to keep it. Joe Barton's boy, 10-year-old boy, was here, and I think he's 10. And we got him in the dugout and put him under the bench. I got to look at the shooter who was just behind the backstop there, just a man with a blue shirt, but he could have fired into the dugout while we were there, so we had to all get down again. And then somebody finally, after about 10 minutes, yelled, "Shooter's down." And so I sprinted out to Steve and put pressure on the wound. He was shot in the left hip. So
Senator Jeff Flake describing how he tended to House Majority Whip Stephen Scalise among 4 people shot in Alexandria, Virginia, by a gunman who was also shot and wounded. This is live coverage from ABC News. I'm Aaron Katersky. The governor of Virginia will brief shortly after his community in Alexandria was the scene of another mass shooting in this country, this one targeting members of Congress. The gunman carried a long gun and a handgun to a congressional baseball practice where Republican members of the House and Senate were preparing for their upcoming charity game tomorrow night at Nationals Park against the Democrats, who had been on the field earlier. This location is where these members of Congress have been practicing for years, so it was well known that they would be there at the appointed hour getting ready for this charity game before they went on to work. And their place of work, the United States Capitol, is now surrounded by a more robust presence than usual. All votes in the House of Representatives have been called off. The president and vice president have each scrapped speeches that they were scheduled to give for the day, and we're waiting to see if either the president, the vice president, the Speaker of the House, anybody is going to make any official statements. We do expect to hear shortly from the governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe. ABC's Kenneth Moten is at the scene. He's with us live now. Kenneth.
Aaron, still that large police presence on the scene where just the yellow crime scene tape is surrounding just a very large portion around that baseball field. Again, ATF, FBI, they are all on this scene with the local police where they are at checkpoints at this point where they are really scattered out because just like any crime scene, any shooting scene we've ever been on, they have to hold the integrity and make sure they gather all the evidence they can to really piece this puzzle together as they speak with the neighbors. And from my experience, Aaron, of just being on any type of scene like this, we know that police are speaking with those witnesses, getting those eyewitness accounts, but they're also possibly checking home surveillance systems. They're checking or canvassing the area, as they call it. Police speak for you there, where they're really searching this area to make sure they can piece all of this together to get a bigger picture of, where did this man come from? Where's his vehicle? Is there anything inside that vehicle that can help with this investigation? Are there any other weapons as well? Where did this man come from? Where is his home? Where's his family? And so all of those investigative questions have to be answered. And because of who was involved, the fact that we had lawmakers of Congress, GOP members, Democratic members earlier who were on the field, because of the nature of this crime, it's pretty intense here. I will admit that. Even though it's a calm scene, the police officers are a little bit more laid back on their stance, different from when I've been on a breaking news scene at the Capitol, and we've seen those long guns out, we've seen the rifles out, we've seen police on alert. Here, yes, a little bit more laid back as investigative officers go under the crime scene tape to the main part of the scene here, but it's still an intense scene as they gather the facts, gather the evidence, And we expect to see that for several more hours today as they work to figure out why did this gunman come here? Why did he target these folks who were practicing on a baseball field, a charity game, in this all-American neighborhood where I'm seeing just houses, family homes, single-family homes, literally just lined up here. I mentioned earlier the American flag there, proudly, patriotically displayed on the front porches of this home in Alexandria, where I don't know the stats and the crime rates for this neighborhood, but you've heard from the witnesses who have spoken to us live here for ABC News that they're not used to this, Aaron. They're not used to hearing gunshots. They're not used to the fact that having this large scene of police, of local and federal officers in their backyard. And at this point, as they try to come to terms about what happened, it's the police who are trying to figure out exactly what was the motive here, Aaron.
ABC's Kenneth Moton on scene in Alexandria, Virginia, at the baseball field where a member of Congress, House Majority Whip Steve Scalise, and 3 others were shot and wounded. Scalise is in surgery, said to be in stable condition, and a tweet from President Trump said that he would make a full recovery. He was tended to by Senator Jeff Flake, a fellow Republican who was practicing for this baseball game. Senator Flake described a short while ago how he tended to House Majority Whip Scalise and how other members tended to him where he fell around the second baseline after dozens and dozens of shots rang out. And Capitol Police, who were there providing security to the Majority Whip, were able to engage the shooter. Alexandria Police said that they were there on scene within 3 minutes. The police are due to brief on scene some point soon, as is Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. As the U.S. Capitol opens for business, there is a large police presence. I want to turn to ABC's Arlette Saenz, who covers the Capitol for us. And as you're gathering information, I mean, the mood there has to be fairly tense.
I imagine since they're deploying more Capitol Police officers around the Capitol, it is a more tense situation than normal. You normally have maybe 2 or 3 officers guarding each of the entrances to the Capitol, as well as the House office buildings. They've likely deployed many more to that scene. We're also hearing that many of the committees are delaying their hearings, and the House has canceled votes. So it's certainly not business as usual on the Capitol right now, and you will see a heightened police presence probably throughout the day.
Speaker Ryan has spoken now with President Trump. We know the House has canceled all votes. As you say, committees are canceling their business for the day. And even Democrats, too, are speaking out, calling this a cowardly act. We still don't know the motive, but it appears that these members of Congress who were on the baseball field were targeted. Other than the Majority Whip, though, none of them get a security detail.
That's right. The security detail is only provided to the top leadership of both the House and Senate. You'll also often see Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, as well as Chuck Schumer on the Democratic side, Nancy Pelosi. They have Capitol Police detail. And, this also is just reminding Congress members and staffers up on the Hill of that 2011 shooting with Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. And I think when I first heard of it, that was my first thought, the first memory that came back was that shooting at a campaign event that she was hosting back in her hometown. So I know the thoughts and prayers of all of the lawmakers are with their fellow lawmakers who are on that field today.
Gabby Giffords ended up on Twitter making a statement expressing just that sentiment. It's ABC's Arlette Saenz, who's covers the Capitol for us and with us as we await a briefing from Alexandria Police and Governor Terry McAuliffe, who are expected to be together to brief us here in just a couple of minutes to give us the latest on this shooting. Members of Congress were shot while playing baseball. They were practicing for an upcoming game that the Republicans have against the Democrats. This is an annual thing for charity, and it is something that was supposed to take place tomorrow night at Nationals Park. We haven't heard whether it's on or off. We know that Steve Scalise had said recently how much he was looking forward to this. The Republicans practiced separately from the Democrats. The Republicans were on the field when a gunman came by with 2 weapons, at least, that we know of, a long gun and a handgun. And the presence of 2 guns suggests a degree of preparation, of course. And I want to turn briefly to Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News consultant. You have this degree of preparation, the way eyewitnesses have described his movements in taking cover. But we've also heard no link to terrorism. I think that means Islamic extremist type terrorism. domestic terrorism doesn't seem like something that could be ruled out at this stage, Steve.
Absolutely. You can't rule out domestic terrorism because there hasn't been any information to say otherwise. I mean, if the investigation determines that he had some kind of mental issues, mental health, was just a random person, sees people practicing at this baseball field and decides to commit an attack like this, albeit he's armed with a long gun rifle, a handgun with a lot of ammunition, okay, so be it. But right now, you cannot rule domestic terrorism off the table. And for the public, there is a difference. We've been throwing the word around terrorism just because of all the attacks in Europe, London, the various homegrown radicalized attacks here in the U.S., but there is a big difference. One is inspired by a foreign terrorist organization, whether it's ISIS, Al-Qaeda. That's what we've been talking about lately with regards to those various attacks. But there's also domestic terrorism, which the FBI views as basically a group that's domestic, that's here in the U.S. It's not inspired by a foreign organization. And you hear the types of groups such as white supremacists, neo-Nazis. You have the Black Panthers. There's also the anarchist, anti-government types of entities where they hate the U.S. government. They don't acknowledge the U.S. government's authority here in the U.S., and therefore they fight against it. Those are the types of groups operating.
Steve Gomez, an ABC News consultant formerly of the FBI, police in Alexandria, Virginia, along with the governor, Terry McAuliffe, appear to be getting ready to brief reporters at the scene, and we'll bring you those remarks. You're listening to live coverage from ABC News. I'm Aaron Katersky. Police in Alexandria, Virginia, and the governor, Terry McAuliffe, are about to brief reporters at the scene of another mass shooting in this country. This one, a baseball field in the Washington, D.C. area where members of Congress were getting ready for a charity game, Republicans versus Democrats, and it was Republicans on the field. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise was shot in the hip, wounded, in stable condition, undergoing surgery. A staff member for another Republican congressman was also among those hit, as was someone on the U.S. Capitol Police Force. The governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, has stepped to the microphone in Alexandria with members of law enforcement, including the Alexandria police chief, getting ready to brief reporters at the scene to give us the latest on this shooting. Here's the chief.
Mike Brown. Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Brown, Chief of the Alexandria Police Department. It's BROWN.
Can you come closer to the microphones, please?
Thank you. We're here today to give you an update on the incident that occurred this morning here in Alexandria. And let me repeat, if I can, some of the facts that we do know at this point. Before I start, though, I want to say that this incident is not an active incident. The city is safe. We have an active investigation going on for the incident that took place this morning. But I want to reassure the community here in Alexandria that this city is indeed safe. We will continue to work with the investigation as it moves forward. The facts as we have it this morning, again, at 0709, 9 minutes after 7 o'clock, we received a 911 call of an active shooter at Simpson Park here on Monroe in Alexandria. Our units responded and were on scene within 3 minutes. The officers received fire from a suspect, and they returned fire, and that part of the investigation is ongoing as we speak. We came to find out that at this event was a practice session for a baseball team involving some representatives from Congress, or some employees from Congress. There were Capitol Police individuals, a contingent on scene, and they also engaged with the subject, and I'll let the emergency medical personnel that responded to the scene from the Alexandria Fire Department, as well as officers from the Alexandria Police Department, provided treatment to a number of individuals on scene. Those individuals, we know that 5 of them were transported by public emergency medical sources to hospitals within the area to deal with a variety of injuries and treatment. At this point, the Alexandria Police Department, because this case involves the assault on a federal officer, The Federal Bureau of Investigation will be taking over the investigation, and we welcome our work with the FBI. We are embedded and are assisting the FBI along with other agencies that are trying to deal with this particular scene and this investigation of this incident. That said, I would also like to say our gratitude to the allied agencies that responded to this scene. We had individuals from the Alexandria Sheriff's Department, of course the Alexandria Fire Department, who were initial response, helped us a great deal in trying to manage this thing. And quite frankly, I couldn't be more proud of the men and women that were involved from the Alexandria Police Department. They did an outstanding job, in my opinion, from what I hear so far. At this point, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Chief Verderosa from the Capitol Police to come up and talk a little bit about their efforts in this area and what they're doing. Chief?
Thank you, Chief. I would like to first start out by thanking the Alexandria Police, Sheriff's Office, Fire Department, the FBI, ATF, and all of our federal law enforcement and local partners who assisted in this response. Certainly, it's a very large response. It's going to take a while to sort through all of the details. My units of our Dignitary Protection Division were on site with Congressional Protectee when we had when the incident occurred. They did engage in gunfire with the suspect and were assisted by the Alexandria Police. The officers, the United States Capitol Police officers who were injured are in good condition and have not suffered any life-threatening injuries at this point. As we get more information, we'll be working through the FBI and our local partners with the Alexandria Police to provide more details as they become available. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the FBI.
Good morning, Tim Slater. I'm the SAC, the Special Agent in charge at the Washington Field Office. And I just want to reiterate what the chiefs have said. This is a secure community at this point. It's an active investigation. However, the security of the community is a paramount, and I want to reassure you that that's the case. So we got involved around 9:30 this morning. Initially, we responded with our National Capital Response Squad from the JTTF per our protocol, and they were assisting our state and local partners. Once it was confirmed that we had a member of Congress that was involved in the incident, we have taken the lead. However, this is a joint command, and this is a joint investigation with our state and local partners to include who's been at the microphone already and our partners from ATF and Alexandria County and Alexandria City and Capitol Police as well. I will take a couple questions in just a second, but I want to turn it over to the governor for a second for a couple comments.
Thank you. Let me first of all, thoughts and prayers everybody affected by today's incident. I want to congratulate the effort of the state, local, and federal. We're all here together. Early this morning, state police and VDEM were activated. I want to thank everybody who's involved, but I specifically want to thank all the first responders. I have been told that members of the neighborhood and the community came out to be of assistance. This is truly an extraordinary effort, and I also want to compliment the U.S. Capitol Police for their quick action, and through their heroic efforts and others, they saved a lot of lives today. We do everything we can to keep our communities safe, and I once again want to thank all the law enforcement personnel and first responders who were involved today. Thank you.
Agent Slater, sir, can you step to the microphone?
What can you tell us about
your
the suspect?
Feeling at this point that this was, what you see, number one, a deliberate planned attack, and are you investigating this now on the basis it could be an act of terrorism by an individual?
Ma'am, it's too early to say. It's really raw at this moment. We're just at the initial
Look at the camera,
investigation. So it's too early to say. We're working it both ways right now.
When you say you're working it both ways, so is one of the angles you're exploring, investigating, that it could be an act of terrorism?
We're exploring all angles.
And do you have any information, it is said that there may be a tentative ID, even if you can't say specifics, are you beginning to narrow down on the identity of the shooter?
Yes, we are.
Sir, was this an assassination attempt, sir? Was this an assassination attempt?
Do you know who he is?
No, it's not an assassination.
Do you know who he is?
We're still working on it.
Sir, are there certain members of Congress are being targeted?
American, is he former military?
Will not confirm that. No, sir.
Are you certain members of Congress were being targeted, though? Was this an intentional attack on them?
Too early to tell if they were targeted or not.
Can you give us about whether anyone has suffered life-threatening injuries, and can you tell us about the condition?
Don't know. Everybody was transported to the hospital and is receiving medical treatment. Just don't know about the life-threatening.
What kind of weapon of Congress said that the shooter asked, are these Republicans or Democrats? Can you say yet whether you think there is a political motivation in this?
No, not aware of that at all.
But are you giving information on the weapon, random?
No information on the weapon. No, don't know yet.
So are you saying that this could have been random?
Don't know. It's really early in the investigation. I don't know any of those facts, right? It's too early to say one way or the other.
Can you give us the condition of the suspect? The suspect was taken to the hospital. Do you know his condition and also the general condition of the officers who were shot?
I think the officers are doing better. I'm not sure about the suspect at this time.
Is the suspect talking to law enforcement?
Say again?
Is there any information on those?
No, ma'am. Not at this point.
Are there any other scenes you're looking at? Cars or security details you're seeing with Congressman Scalise in this incident? Can you just give us a sense of the importance of the fact that there were armed officers on the scene when this started?
Members of a dignitary protection, yes, they were here. Yes, as a protection team.
And the difference it made?
I'm sure it made a significant difference.
Sir, is that suspect talking to you at this point? Is he cooperating? Is he explaining?
Do not know the answer to that.
Security detail, any other scenes, any cars, suspect's house? Is there anywhere else this investigation is taking place?
We have secured the scene, and we're getting through the logical investigative steps at this point. As far
you had
as
said you don't think this is an assassination attempt, and yet it would appear that members of Congress were targeted.
No, I did not say that. What I said is that we are not sure at this moment. It's still early on in the investigation, and we're working through it.
Is your suspect a local man, or is he from elsewhere?
Do not know yet.
Don't know even if he's from the region?
No, ma'am.
Can you clarify, was it an assassination attempt?
Say again?
Do you know if the suspect approached lawmakers in the parking lot and asked whether or not they were Republican or Democratic members?
I'm not aware of that, no ma'am.
Sir, you said earlier that it wasn't an assassination attempt. Can you just clarify for us, was this or was this not an assassination?
I will. If I said that, I misspoke. It's too early in the investigation to say one way or the other.
Can you confirm his appearance? So there's some reports that he had white hair, others that he had dark hair. Can you just tell us what his ID, what he was?
No, I'm not aware of what his appearance looks like.
Just the last couple questions.
Legislator, given the fact you've laid out obviously how much you don't know at this point and how much you're investigating, how, with all due respect, can you and the chief and the governor say that if you don't know that the community is safe and this area is safe, how can you rule out, sir, that there is not a broader threat situation?
From the early on in the investigation where we are right now, we think we have a really good handle on it. We just want to run out a couple details before we confirm other additional stuff.
Sir, can you tell us about the weapon and whether there was more than one?
I cannot, no ma'am.
Can we ask the Capitol Hill Police Chief?
It was.
I do not know.
Sir, how many times has that
Can we ask the Capitol Hill Police Chief, sir, can we get an update on your officers who engaged the suspect? We understand that they were wounded in the line of duty. Can you give us an update on how they're doing?
Certainly, yes. They are being treated at a local hospital, and the injuries do not appear to be life-threatening at this point.
Did you say good condition when you listed their condition, sir?
I would categorize from what I've been informed that they're in good condition.
And can you describe what they did, how they engaged the suspect?
Well, we received reports of gunfire through our communications, and then we coordinated with the Alexandria police. So obviously, from the early instance of this incident, it was shots were fired.
But your officers engaged the suspect, yes?
Do you plan for stuff like
my
this?
understanding.
Where were you plan for stuff like this to happen at events like this?
Where were your officers at when they started firing on the gunman? Were they in the field? Or were they
We're not. It's just really too preliminary to go into the details of the investigation. Suffice it to say that our officers acted, I believe, heroically today, and they're in good condition, and we look for a rapid recovery. So, and with that said, I'll turn it back over to
one officer, male, one female, is that correct?
I'm not going to comment on the names, numbers, until I'm reasonably sure that next of kin are notified.
Absolutely.
What about the investigation tells you anything about the motivation here and whether it was political?
We're not going to go into any kind of motivation. Much too preliminary in the investigation.
But anything in the indication who he shot, what he was doing? There was some conversations before?
It's too early on. When the facts come to light, we'll share what we can share.
But you say the area is safe right now. That would imply one person acting.
Can I have one question? Is the fifth person a victim or is the fifth person the shooter?
We're not going to comment on that. Like the chief said, it's significantly early.
The
And so,
Alexandria Police Department
Are
said
there
that
4
the
victims or
fifth
5 victims?
person injured was the shooter. Is that correct?
I'm not going to confirm
But
that.
you can confirm that there were 5 people injured.
I'm not going to confirm that either.
Chief, you said that earlier. There were 5 people transported by public emergency medical personnel to hospitals.
Was the suspect one of them?
I'm not going to comment on that. That's an ongoing investigation issue. But let me comment to the question about the safe community piece. We have several things going on. The police department, after we secured the scene here, did an awful lot of work in the community. We walked the community, we looked for secondary issues, we brought in additional resources and assets so that we could deal with any possible secondary thing. The question that was directed about the investigation, if in fact it reveals something else, then we will certainly respond to that. But right now, every indication in this city is that this is an isolated incident, but the investigation will indeed be long-term. And let me also do a thank you to the agencies that assisted us, and as we canvassed the neighborhoods and looked around the community to make sure this was safe, and that would include the Virginia State Police, and the Alexandria Sheriff's Office, and a lot of folks, even in the neighborhood, came out to kind of make sure that we were doing the right thing.
Were there any other minor injuries?
There were 5 people transported by.
But any other?
I won't go into that.
Being reported if we don't
Well,
know if
now,
it's 4 or 5
I can't speak to the information that the others are reporting, folks.
But any other
5
injuries?
people were
Was anybody treated on the
I
scene?
can't speak to that. I'll refer to the FBI on that.
Can we ask the governor?
Can we ask the governor one question? Sir, if you could
Are any of the other injuries
Can we
life
just ask
threatening?
you, from your point of view, on a broader level, and your knowledge about the national capital area, your view about the safety of the area? Did you have any information prior? Did any investigatory agencies that there might be a threat in this area? There might be a threat directed towards Congress. How satisfied are you now, as you stand here, that you have a handle on what happened here and that there is no additional threat in Washington?
I can tell you from the Virginia's perspective, from Secretary of Public Safety, Brian Moran, who's here with me, and VDEM, we had no prior information that would lead us to believe that anything like this was going to occur.
Governor, in general, do you think anything more needs to do to protect politicians?
Well, let me say this. I think we need to do more to protect all of our citizens. I have long advocated, this is not what today is about, but there are too many guns on the street. We lose 93 million Americans a day to gun violence. I mean, I've long talked about it.
After law enforcement went over some bare bones details, they confirmed this is no longer an active incident and insisted the city is safe in Alexandria. Of course, they wouldn't say what leads them to that conclusion. They wouldn't even confirm how many people were shot. They did say that 5 people were transported to the hospital. They didn't confirm that that does include the shooter. So how we are then left to conclude that the city is safe if they won't confirm that the shooter is somehow in the hospital and rendered no longer a threat. But beside the point, we believe the shooter is somehow neutralized. We think the shooter's been shot by Capitol Police who were there. This all began just after 7 a.m. 911 callers reported an active shooter at Simpson Park where members of Congress were playing baseball, getting ready for their charity game. Officers, when they arrived, received fire from the suspect and returned fire, so there will be questions about who was hit by what bullets. The FBI is going to take all of this over now. It is too early, the FBI said, to say whether this is terrorism, whether this was deliberate, whether these members of Congress were targeted. They say they are exploring all angles. Let me turn to Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News consultant. You want to translate some of the law enforcement speak we just heard, Steve?
Well, my translation is it is very early, as the guy, as the SAC mentioned, and they are probably trying to figure out what's going on. They're probably flooded with a lot of information, and this is basically the organizational exercise that goes into a high-profile, complex type of investigation, an attack of this sort, where there's quite a bit of chaos and confusion, and now they're trying to get the information together. It sounds like they are now giving it over to the FBI, and the ATF is there as well. The FBI is going to be looking at, and the SAC said it, the Joint Terrorism Task Force. So I have to believe that this is now pursued as a domestic terrorism investigation, even though they're not saying that. But just when you say JTTF, that includes not just international, but domestic terrorism. That's probably how they're approaching it in the event that it is a domestic terrorism group.
Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News consultant. The House has canceled votes, but the Senate is coming into session for the day, and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell with remarks on the shooting live from the U.S. Capitol.
Continue to send them every wish for a quick and full recovery. We're grateful for all those who stepped in to help, those practicing on the field, the first responders, and of course the Capitol Police officers on the scene. We're deeply indebted for their service. We again salute their continuing and unfailing bravery on behalf of the Capitol community. The Congressional Baseball Game is a bipartisan charity event. I know the Senate will embrace that spirit today as we come together in expressing both our concern and bipartisan charity event. I know the Senate will embrace that spirit today as we come together in expressing both our concern and our gratitude.
Our prayers for those who are injured, and I was absolutely shaken. I join with the Majority Leader in offering our prayers for those who are injured, and I was absolutely shaken by the news of a shooting early this morning at the baseball field in Alexandria, where many of my friends and colleagues were practicing for the annual Congressional Baseball Game, an event that brings us together each year. It's been reported that Representative Scalise, the House Whip, was shot during the attack, as were two brave members of the Capitol Police Force and others, including a staffer. Let us pray that they and any others who are injured are able to recover quickly. This morning is the most sobering a reminder of how thankful we should be for the service of the Capitol Police Force, who put their lives on the line day in, day out for us to be safe. I could not be more grateful that Capitol Police were there at a time to prevent this attack from being any worse than it was. I was with Senator Paul in the gym, who had been there, and he told me had these two Capitol Police officers who were part of Congressman Scalise's detail not been there, it might have been a massacre, because there would have been no one to respond. But their bravery is exemplary of all Capitol Police Force, and we thank them. The entire Senate family sends its thoughts and prayers to those who were wounded, and our gratitude to the police officers and first responders who were at the scene. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business.
Shot Steve Scalise, the Majority Whip, is in stable condition in surgery after being shot in the hip. Two Capitol Police officers who were shot are in good condition, and a congressional staff member who was shot has been identified as Zach Barth. He is a legislative aide in the office of Representative Roger Williams. We want to turn to Congressman Fleischman now, right, of Tennessee, who's been speaking to reporters at the Capitol, still wearing his baseball shirt and hat, his Tennessee Vols hat, and his red baseball shirt that says Republicans across the chest, speaking now to reporters at the U.S. Capitol.
It is a sad day. My personal thoughts and prayers go out to all of those who were severely injured and wounded, and there were several. My injuries are minor, thank God, for the Capitol Police. They were there to guard our whip, Steve Scalise. But for that fact, there would have been much, much more damage. I don't know why. I'm very thankful, prayerfully thankful that I was not shot. I was on that side of the field at the conclusion of practice, walking down the third base side, visiting with my good friend Trent Kelly from Mississippi. We were talking about how well practice had gone that day. And then as I went around, I heard a large single pop, one shot. I didn't know it was a gun at first, so we were standing around. Within moments, there was a barrage of shots being fired. Larry Hardy, who is one of our coaches, we have a lot of volunteer coaches who's come out and help both teams. And we hit the ground immediately. And then And then we realized that we were literally out there. We didn't exactly know where the shots were coming from, but it was loud. It was constant. So I actually ran and jumped in the dugout. That's when I got scuffed up. That's when I got scuffed up. And when I got in the dugout, we realized the shooter was still active. There was a child in the dugout because children come out and watch us play. The children were secured. We went against the wall in the dugout. Fortunately, the Capitol Police were able to return fire and at least stop the shooter from moving forward because we were like sitting ducks in the dugout.
Were you able to get a look at the shooter?
I was not. I heard it, and I did not see him. Other members actually did see him moving around and took cover. Several, multiple shots, and it seemed like it went on for quite some time because when I got back into the dugout with the members there, I realized one gentleman had been shot in the leg and he was bleeding. I could actually see the bullet hole in his leg. Other members were like me, bloodied up just trying to get there because they just jumped into the dugout. It seemed like it went on for an awful long period of time. Fortunately, there was return fire from the Capitol Police to keep the shooter at bay. Calls went out for help. Virginia police came as backup, and it's my understanding that they subdued the shooter. They subdued it? Was he still alive? I don't know.
And during the Capitol Police present, were those just Scalise's personal details?
Yes. And that is very normal. Our speaker, the majority leader, and the whip get 24-hour Capitol Police coverage, as do, I believe, the majority leader and their side. And that is something that's been in place for quite some time. This is my 7th year playing on the congressional baseball team, and they are there every day with Whip Scalise. Today, it was so important that they were there, and 2 were injured. My thoughts and prayers and thanks, my sincere thanks go out to them. A lot more members would have been more seriously hurt if they had not been there to return fire.
Do you think that the security needs to change for rank and file members?
Thank you. God bless you.
For rank and file members, given what happened, does it make you rethink just getting out of a group at a town hall meeting here?
Well, this is what I said earlier, and I'm still in shock about this because I've never actually been fired upon. I served with some men and women who have actually been in combat before, and I talked with them after the event, said, what was that like? Let me say this.
Could you speak
baseball,
to the cameras as well?
Sure, I'm sorry.
Take a step this way, sir.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Baseball is a part of America. It's been a dear part of our country's history.
All right, so Congressman Chuck Fleischman, Republican of Tennessee, speaking about his experience at baseball practice with other members of Congress when shots rang out. ABC News has identified the suspect now as James Hodgkinson. He's from Illinois, and he is 66 years old. He does have a bit of a criminal record, nothing terribly serious. The rap sheet that we've been able to see is for a number of traffic violations, disregarding a stop sign, speeding. There is one case 10 years ago for battery, but otherwise nothing that would indicate what he was allegedly about to do today, just after 7 o'clock in the morning. Let me turn to ABC News consultant Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI. James Hodgkinson is 66 years old, of Illinois. If you look on social media, he does make political statements on what appears to be his Facebook page against President Trump. That's something that law enforcement is certainly going to be looking at.
Absolutely. They're going to be really focused in on that. And the Facebook page, as we've talked about, the social media profile that will be dug into by the investigators, that's very important in that, excuse me, if he's making political statements, whether it's anti-Trump, anti-U.S. government, that definitely is a lead on the motive of the suspect. So once again, he's from Southern Illinois, from what it looks like. That is an area. I used to be the assistant special agent in charge for the FBI in St. Louis. That general area, there is certain types of activity, anarchist, anti-government activists, And so that would definitely be the profile that the FBI and the other agencies would be looking at as far as their investigation and what the motive is for this suspect.
ABC's Steve Gomez, our consultant on law enforcement matters. 66-year-old James Hodgkinson of Belleville, Illinois. We spoke with his wife a short while ago. She was unaware of the alleged link to her husband. She told us that he has been living in Alexandria, Virginia for the last couple of months. He has not been working while in Virginia, but was expected to return to Illinois in the coming days. At the end of last year, according to his social media accounts, he left his job as a home inspector, an air quality mold tester. That, again, is according to his social media. But when we spoke to the wife of 66-year-old James Hodgkinson of Belleville, Illinois, the wife said she was unaware of the alleged link to her husband, said he had been living in Alexandria for the past couple of months, not working, and was expected to return to Belleville, Illinois in the coming days. Much more to come as we learn more about this alleged shooter, James Hodgkinson of Belleville, Illinois, as identified by multiple law enforcement officials. We've just learned that President Trump is expected to address this shooting about a half an hour from now. Those remarks you will certainly hear live. He canceled an event later on this afternoon that had been scheduled. Vice President Pence also canceled an event, and the House of Representatives canceled all votes today. The Senate, though, is open for business, and at the start of the session, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell opened the chamber with brief remarks on the shooting, saying that the entire Senate joins in echoing the sentiments of the president, who said, "We're deeply saddened, concerned for all those injured." Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, added that he was with Senator Rand Paul, who had been at the practice earlier. Schumer said that Paul repeated his gratitude that Representative Scalise's protective detail was there. I'm Aaron Katersky, and you're listening to live coverage from ABC News. Members of Congress are expressing their gratitude to U.S. Capitol Police, two of whom were shot and wounded, said now to be in good condition when shots rang out earlier this morning at congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia. We heard a moment ago from police who declined to identify any of those who were shot, declined to identify the suspect, but ABC News has learned that the suspect is 66-year-old James Hodgkinson, now said to be shot and wounded after he was engaged by police, U.S. Capitol Police, who were there providing security to House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. Among what we think are 4 people shot, 2 U.S. Capitol Police officers and a staffer for another member of Congress named Zach Barth. He was in the office of Representative Roger Williams. He has been receiving medical attention, we're told, doing well, expected to make a full recovery. ABC's Kenneth Moten on scene for us live now in Alexandria. Kenneth.
And Aaron, as we just heard live here, those federal law enforcement officers, local law enforcement officers who gave an update along with Governor Terry McAuliffe of Virginia here, and still just a large scene that's blocked off here because police are still processing this scene. The FBI, again, has taken over this area around the baseball field in this community, this Delray neighborhood of Alexandria, a quiet community where there were a number of neighbors and residents who were lined up or who were coming out of their homes to start their day when they heard those gunshots. Many of them just really either hunkered down if they were outside, they ran for cover. Some of those witnesses we spoke with this morning, Aaron, they say they saw that Capitol Police, a security detail for the Majority Whip, on the ground firing back at the suspected gunman. And so as we heard law enforcement, they're trying to figure out more on the motive. They're trying to figure out exactly why did this man come here. At this point, terrorism, it's too early to say. We know that community, Belleville, is just outside of St. Louis. And so we expect and we know that law enforcement, especially local or federal law enforcement in that regional office, they will be trying to find out more from the family of the suspected gunman as well. And so we're still trying to get more updates on exactly what police know and how long they plan to hold this scene, because at this point we know they're talking to witnesses. They're canvassing the area. We heard from the law enforcement official who said they're really searching this area to make sure that they can gather all the evidence, the pieces together, and they've got a large contingent of law enforcement on this scene. I've seen ATF and as well as FBI, who, again, they have taken over this scene right now, a very large one around this baseball field where those GOP lawmakers were just practicing for that charity game.
ABC's Kenneth Moten at the scene in Alexandria, Virginia, which police said is a safe city today because this is no longer an active incident. The suspect we've identified is James Hodgkinson, 66 years old, of Belleville, Illinois. He was said to be shot and wounded, also in the hospital, according to the Alexandria police. And I want to turn to ABC's Karen Travers at the White House now. We've heard that President Trump is going to make remarks about this shooting a short while from now. Karen. We'll get to Karen in a second.
President Trump has been busy on the phone this morning. He's spoken to House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. The president also talked to the wife of Congressman Steve Scalise, injured in today's shooting. Steve Scalise is chief of staff and the chief of the Capitol Police. Karen Travers, ABC News, the White House.
And so President Trump's remarks will be coming about a half hour or so from now. You will hear those live. And as you heard Karen report, the president has not only canceled an event that he was supposed to have this afternoon, he has been on the phone with members of Congress and notably with Steve Scalise's family, expressing his thoughts to them. Scalise was shot on the hip, was wounded, stable condition, and apparently was in good enough spirits to be able to talk to his wife by phone. A number of his colleagues had rushed to his aid once the shooter was down. This James Hodgkinson, 66 years old, of Belleville, Illinois, came to the park with two guns, we're told, a long gun and a handgun. Police, the ATF, is now urgently tracing those weapons to see if they were obtained legally or not. And no doubt police have been crawling through Hodgkinson's social media profile. On his Facebook page, there are a number of posts against President Trump, some of them rather angry in nature. Some posts indicate he was a supporter of Bernie Sanders, but the FBI has not indicated whether they believe yet this was a deliberate act targeting Republican members of Congress, but the pieces do now seem fairly obvious. Let's get back to Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, who served for a time in the office in St. Louis, right near Belleville, Illinois. I mean, it seems, as you look at the social media page, it seems as if he had at least the political leanings and motivations. Why, though, he would take that to this kind of level is something that we still don't know.
Right, and it's a real toxic ingredient mixture when you take somebody who has this kind of political, bend, and then has access to weaponry such as a long gun, a handgun, a massive amount of ammunition. You have to also look at the fact that he is from the southern Illinois area. And he goes out to the Alexandria area, is living there for 2 months. Why is he living there? I mean, we haven't determined why he moved out there, if his wife and his family is out in southern Illinois. And he wasn't working in Alexandria. So what was the reason for him to be out there? Was it because he was out there gathering information on whether it's, the Trump administration, whether it's the Republicans, the Democrats, Congress members, whatever? We have determined that it has been reported about this baseball charity event that the Congress members were going to be involved in. They had it last year. So did he go out there in order to stake out this event and then to commit this type of an attack, right before the actual charity baseball event? That's going to be something that's looked at in the investigation.
Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News consultant on law enforcement matters, as we learn more about the alleged gunman, James Hodgkinson, 66 years old, of Belleville, Illinois, with a social media profile that indicates he perhaps harbored some anger at President Trump or maybe Republicans generally. And could that be why he opened fire on their baseball practice earlier this morning in Alexandria, Virginia? Police and the FBI have not said for sure, but it's certainly something that they are taking a look at. We are awaiting remarks from President Trump, who is due to speak about 20 minutes from now, and we are also hearing that House Speaker Paul Ryan will address his members later on. The House canceled votes today. They are certainly thinking of the congressional staffer who was shot, a couple of Capitol Police officers, and House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. And we've heard many members make mention that had Scalise not been there, there would have been no protective detail. He gets one because he's the majority whip. He is now said to be in stable condition, undergoing surgery for a bullet wound to the hip. His friend and fellow Congressman Peter Welch spoke a short while ago.
Well, I don't. Just what I'm reading. But Steve is a great guy. He and I were junior members of the Energy and Commerce Committee. He was the last on the Republican side. I was the last on the Democratic side. So we sat next to each other. And he's a guy who loves his family. He's got a wife and 2 kids. He loves the LSU Tigers. He loves Cajun cooking, and it's really good. And he loves doing his job. You know, he just relates to people every day in his district. And he's a happy warrior here. He and I don't agree literally on anything, but he wants to help. And in Vermont, when we had Tropical Storm Irene, which was our most devastating natural event since 1937, Steve was on the phone calling me, what can I do to help? And he made a huge difference in getting the emergency relief that Vermont needed. So he's been a good friend, and it's hard not to like Steve Scalise.
We've heard a lot about that this morning, and also, Congressman, we're also getting word just now about the shooter, the identification of the shooter, a man named James T. Hodgkinson, who apparently was specifically targeting Republicans. If you look at his social media, clearly had a lot of anger.
Well, that's pretty horrifying. You know, they're out there playing baseball. Steve is the kind of member of Congress who is just going to wade in and be around the people he represents. It's the joy in his life to be connecting and relating to the people that he represents. And in the sense of the word representative, there's nobody better than Steve. So the whole security issue is going to have to be reviewed, but thank goodness that Steve had his security detail there that was able to respond as quickly as they did, along with the Alexandria police. But, you know, bottom line here, this is a tough environment politically, and we've got a lot of division in Congress, a lot of division in the country. But the baseball game was where there's been this bipartisan effort to raise money and actually do normal things like play baseball. And Steve is, we're all devastated at this happening. But I think all of us don't want really to change the way we relate to the folks that we represent. We just want to be everyday people with them. So the security folks are going to have to decide what changes, if any, need to be made. But already at the Capitol, when I walked across the Capitol today, no people were allowed in the courtyard in front of the Capitol. There was heavy police presence with automatic weapons. So it's already had a real impact today on what's going on around here.
Congressman Peter Welch, a Democrat of Vermont, speaking there to my colleague ABC's George Stephanopoulos a short while ago. Welch is a Democrat, but a good friend of House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. You heard him say we don't agree on anything, but still managed to have that cordial relationship. And it appears that Scalise and others were targeted by a man whose social media page indicates a good deal of anger at the president and maybe at Republicans generally. James Hodgkinson of Illinois, Belleville, Illinois, 66 years old. And the President of the United States is due to speak a short while from now. We will carry those remarks live. We also want to hear from Congressman Pat Meehan, who spoke a short while ago about his thoughts about Steve Scalise and what has gone on today.
This morning I actually had a breakfast that was a conflict, so I was there yesterday, but the familiarity with the details of that have been reported and knowing the field and frankly where every player would normally be gives you a sense of location, which is a little unnerving.
What else have you been able to learn?
I don't know that I'm learning much more than everybody else because the breaking news was right from the scene and I think has been accurately reported. The nature of the practice is we're on an open field every morning at about 6:15, much like any group of kids would be at a basketball park or a team playing. And the fact that we're a bunch of older guys out there in the morning usually draws some attention. People say, who are those guys? And passerbys, some, it's a routine. They walk their dogs there on a regular basis, the dog park. Others attending the YMCA, which is adjacent to the field. So you're really just like any other group of people out in the middle of a public space.
But as you said, people did know you all like to practice there, that it was a regular thing.
Yeah, there's no doubt that there's a routine. In fact, it might be something that if somebody was looking for a way to see a group, it's sort of uncommon to have 25 or 30 members of Congress collected together, and of course a whole group of younger staffers that come out and help, sometimes serving as the opposing team or helping with the practices. So it's a location where you have a lot of people gathered together, members of Congress, just in a very public space.
We've now identified the shooter, James T. Hodgkinson. Federal authorities have identified the shooter. Some indication based on his social media profile that he had some strong political views, real anger against President Trump and Republicans, indications at least that this was, a real targeted attack. Your reaction?
Well, I don't know what motivated him. I'm sure more will come out, and maybe he will speak himself about that. Obviously, the hard language and even to some extent vitriol that's taking place in the political discourse today is regrettable. And, you hope that this isn't the kind
It's Congressman Pat Meehan speaking a short while ago to my colleague, ABC's George Stephanopoulos, and you could hear him begin to come to understand that this may have been a targeted attack on members of Congress, Republican members in particular, by someone that federal authorities have identified to ABC News as James Hodgkinson, 66 years old, of Belleville, Illinois. We've been taking a look at his social media profile, and on his Facebook page, for example, there are a number of posts that indicate a good deal of anger against President Trump. Perhaps these Republicans were targeted due to that. But again, police haven't quite said. When we spoke to the suspect's wife, she said that she didn't even know of this alleged link and didn't really give us any indication as to why he had been living for the last 2 months in Alexandria, Virginia, never working and never holding down a job, was due to return to Illinois. But that raises the possibility that was he there preparing for some kind of an attack? I mean, you just don't know yet. So all possibilities, as we heard from the FBI today, are on the table, and we wait to figure out more from law enforcement. We also await remarks from President Trump, who is due to speak a short time from now. And in the meantime, we go back to the scene in Alexandria, Virginia, with ABC's Kenneth Moten.
Aaron, and that scene is still very large at this point, as police have, the yellow crime scene tape up right now. At this point, what we know is that police will stay here for some time to process the scene. FBI, again, has taken this scene over. They are in charge here, definitely because of who was involved, how this all played out. ATF also on this scene, tracing on that rifle and the handgun suspected shooter that we have identified as James Hodgkinson, from Belleville, Illinois, in this area for just a few weeks or a couple of months, was due to go back to that area. But obviously, this was something that played out in the somewhat of the early morning hours before, yes, people were starting to get their day going. But that was the norm here, is that those Democratic members, those Republican members, they would practice early in the morning. And I can tell you, Aaron, after being out here for a few hours, I could see why, especially on a day like today where it's just about 90 degrees here, as law enforcement, they stand here on this asphalt, protecting the area around it, securing the area, this large perimeter that has been set up near this baseball field in this very large community, but a very dense community where there's a number of homes, a number of single-family homes all lined up here, where many of these folks were witnesses, Aaron. They heard the gunshots. Many of them were outside at the time of this shooting. So police want to know what they saw. Do they have surveillance video? What did they capture on their phones? A witness, I spoke with this. He said his phone was actually confiscated by police as they got video off of that phone as part of their investigation. And with the FBI, the ATF, they're not leaving any stone unturned at this point. What I'm looking at right now is not only is a large area blocked off, but a main road going through this neighborhood that has been blocked off, where you can just see the number of law enforcement officers who are not only securing the scene, but they're working with it, obviously crime scene investigators as they gather evidence as well. And so just a very large area blocked off as they try to figure out the exact motive. As you mentioned, we've seen those Facebook postings and get a little bit of a glimpse of just what was maybe in the shooter's mind at the time when this all happened, according to those posts. But at this point, the official word from federal law enforcement is that they're waiting before they say definitely what that motive was.
ABC's Kenneth Moten on scene in Alexandria, Virginia, where the FBI is collecting evidence. The ATF has been tracing the two weapons that eyewitnesses said James Hodgkinson had when he allegedly shot up a congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia. President Trump is due in about 10 minutes' time to make remarks on this shooting. So let's turn to the White House now and ABC's Karen Travers. Karen.
Aaron, the president is going to speak about the shooting in about 10 minutes, as you say, here at the White House. And so far, we've gotten a paper statement from him, and he's also tweeted about the incident, saying his thoughts and prayers are with Steve Scalise, who he calls a true friend and patriot. The president's also been very busy this morning on the phone. He has spoken to the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and he's also spoken to Congressman Steve Scalise's wife, and also had on the phone the chief of staff for Steve Scalise and the chief of the Capitol Police. The White House passes that along to show the president engaged and reaching out. As they say, he's closely monitoring the developments. Also, Aaron, the full public schedule here at the White House today completely upended by this. Vice President Pence canceled a speech in Washington for the 9 o'clock hour to be at the White House with the president. And President Trump was scheduled to go to the Labor Department late this afternoon. That speech has also been canceled.
Karen, we've also confirmed that a lobbyist for Tyson Foods, Matt Micah, was among those shot, according to the company, and a legislative aide for another representative who was also shot. And there was also a couple of Capitol Police officers who were injured as well. There has been mention of tightened security around the U.S. Capitol. Has the White House posture changed? It's always pretty tight.
It's always pretty tight here. Nothing visible. We did a bit of a perimeter walk to check out along the fence line outside of the north lawn of the White House. And in fact, this whole week, there's actually just been a little bit more fencing put up. Tourists not able to get as close to the White House fence line as they were just a couple days ago. Not clear what that was for. Just sometimes they do this. It was not prompted by anything in particular. But there is, you see a couple more officers along the fence line. Now, the Capitol, we are told there is a more robust police presence there. Still, business as usual. The Capitol complex is operational, but they did tell staff and members and any visitors up there to expect to see more police presence over the course of the day.
Karen, let's talk a bit about the political climate, specifically in Washington, but I guess it applies to the entire country. As we look at the social media profile of 66-year-old James Hodgkinson, it indicates a good deal of anger directed at President Trump, some views supportive of Bernie Sanders. But, I mean, a lot of people post about Bernie Sanders and President Trump. But the climate has been rather heated of late.
Certainly, it feels more heated, or perhaps it's always been heated, but people just have more outlets to express their anger and their frustration. 10 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to go to a suspect like this and find an entire social media history and find statements they may have made. But now you can, and this allows reporters to pour through any past statements and try and ascribe or figure out motive. I think, the sense right now we're getting from hearing lawmakers speaking up on the Capitol, I would expect the president to take this tone as well, is this is a time to try and not get bogged down in partisanship, and let's talk about how we can come together. You saw the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer giving back-to-back statements on the Senate floor just a few moments ago, and both going out of their way to compliment, thank, express their gratitude to the U.S. Capitol Police. I think in situations like this, politics, of course, is always that overhanging issue. But right now, they're trying to not get to that point. But Aaron, I would expect very soon we're going to start talking about gun control. We're going to start talking about political rhetoric. It's always the immediate quick turn after incidents like this.
Yeah, it sure is. And then almost as sure is the retreat to familiar corners with little in the way of, legislative accomplishment in those regards. But we will see what develops out of this as we await remarks from President Trump and then later from House Speaker Paul Ryan and Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, who will open up the House chamber at high noon Eastern time for their members, all of whom have been encouraged to come and hear what Karen, I think, rightly says will be words of a bipartisan concern for not only House Majority Whip Steve Scalise, but the congressional legislative aide who was injured, the Capitol Police officers who were injured and engaged the shooter, and also the lobbyist for Tyson Foods, who also, according to the company, was shot and wounded. Alexandria, Virginia police have only confirmed that 5 people were injured. They haven't said how many were exactly shot, and they have ascribed no motive to the shooter, whom we've identified as James Hodgkinson, 66 years old, of Belleville, Illinois, with a social media profile that indicates some anger at the president, but nothing necessarily that would indicate he was about to go on a shooting rampage. And I want to bring back ABC News consultant Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI. It is a point that Karen raises. We can look at social media and we can draw lines, but can you draw conclusions just from a few social media posts?
No, unfortunately, you really can't draw conclusions that this individual who's posting anger towards Trump and the Trump administration is going to go out and attack Republicans or try to attack the president. It's an indicator that maybe he has a certain mindset, a certain political bend to what he's thinking, but it's not a crime. I mean, it's protected by the First Amendment, and it's very similar to what we're dealing with regards to the international terrorist organizations and their affiliates and supporters that are here. You can't go out and arrest them if they are just looking at a video, if they're posting something, unless they start to make a threat. If he would have posted something where he said that he was going to go travel to Alexandria and hurt somebody from the Republican Party or somebody from the administration, that is then a different step, and they could take action from there. But just posting how he feels about politics, that's not going to get you anywhere as far as any kind of investigation or steps.
Steve, as we've heard from members of Congress, many have made mention that only the Capitol Police were there because Representative Scalise, as Majority Whip, gets a security detail. And some members of Congress have been asked whether anything needs to change in that regard. Can you secure the comings and goings of all 500-plus members of Congress?
That is incredibly difficult. I mean, talk about a manpower situation, a cost issue. I mean, clearly we have to protect our elected officials. And first of all, I want to say that those 2 Capitol Police that were officers that were on the detail are heroes, absolute heroes, and they have got my prayers, them and their family, because the way they responded was just truly heroic, and the country owes them a debt of gratitude. But yes, what they have to look at is in situations like this, because clearly Congress members, elected officials are a potential target, especially in light of what we're dealing with worldwide. I mean, there are people that want to kill our elected officials, no doubt about it. So in a situation like this, where it has been advertised that there's going to be this baseball game, where it has been fairly advertised as well that they are practicing at this field, when you make that kind of advertisement and for the public to maybe come and see, you also have to consider security, and then you have to act accordingly.
Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News consultant, as we await remarks from President Trump and shortly from House Speaker Paul Ryan and Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, who will open the House chamber and have invited all members to come in and hear these bipartisan words of condolence and thought. The shooting unfolded just after 7 o'clock in the morning, and this lasted for several minutes. There were dozens and dozens of shots that were fired, and the crime scene is quite large. The casings spread all over the baseball field. We've seen images of bullets hitting nearby buildings, windows, that sort of thing, and so it's quite a crime scene for the FBI to sort through. The ATF has been busy trying to trace the weapons that the suspect, James Hodgkinson, 66, of Belleville, Illinois, used, a long gun and a handgun. No information specifically about the weapons and whether they were obtained legally or not, and precious little about the specific motive for the shooting, which went down again just after 7 o'clock in the morning. The social media profile indicates some anger at politicians, particularly President Trump, some support for Bernie Sanders, but again, nothing to suggest that it would be taken to this kind of level. We are awaiting remarks from President Trump. Can we go back to the White House? ABC's Karen Travers is there standing by. We know the president's been on the phone specifically with Representative Scalise and his family, but he has also curtailed a schedule because of this.
He has. He was going to give remarks at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time at the Labor Department, talking about job training programs, which was supposed to be the theme of this week here at the White House, but it has been almost completely overshadowed by so many other events, the Russia investigation and now today's violence in Virginia. Aaron, I think it's also interesting to note, and I was pulling up some research on this over the last few minutes, this is the first time as president that Donald Trump has to make remarks about an incident like this, or the first time he is doing remarks like this. He came out in his speech to Congress in late February and commented on a shooting that had happened in Kansas after being criticized for not speaking about it right away. But otherwise, he has not addressed any shootings during his presidency. And we went back and looked at some of the numbers. President Obama did this 18 times over his 8 years in office. Really incredible. So, I think a lot is said of when presidents are put in these types of moments, how do they respond? What tone do they take? This will be the first time we get a sense of what Donald Trump does in a moment like this.
It's ABC's Karen Travers at the White House, where President Trump's remarks are due any moment now. The president has curtailed his schedule, as Karen mentioned, and been on the phone with congressional leaders and with those involved with the Republican whip. Stephen Scalise, who was shot and wounded, has been through surgery, said to be in stable condition now and doing well. A couple of Capitol Police officers who were also injured are said to be in good condition. A lobbyist for Tyson Foods, who used to work for Congressman Vito Fossella of Staten Island, also among the victims, along with another congressional staffer, as all of Washington is moved by this. I'm Aaron Katursky, and you're listening to live coverage from ABC News as we await remarks from President Trump on the shooting that injured a congressman and several others. All of those people were gathered at a baseball field in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C., preparing for an annual charity game that was supposed to take place tomorrow night at Nationals Park in Washington. There's been no decision yet whether that game should go on. But so far, Representative Joe Barton, who is kind of the one that heads up all of this, he's the manager of the Republican team, said that a final decision is yet to be made regarding the scheduled game. We know the Capitol is in for additional security. Members of the House of Representatives have been asked to gather at high noon Eastern time for remarks from the House Speaker and from the Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. And we have already heard from members of the Senate leadership, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, expressing their collective thoughts and gratitude to the Capitol Police who engaged the shooter, who was also hospitalized earlier today. As we await remarks from President Trump, I want to turn to an eyewitness to all of this, Reba Winstead, who's on the line with us. She was one of those who called 911 just after 7 o'clock this morning. Reba, thanks for joining us. What did you see, and where were you when you saw it?
Well, I live about 4 doors down from the backside of the YMCA. My street dead ends into the parking lot there. I was standing on my front porch when I heard the unmistakable sound of gunfire, which is something we don't normally hear around here. Then it was about 10 to 12 shots. There was a pause, and then they started up again with a much faster volley of probably about 30 to 40 shots. I ran inside and was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, and she could hear the shots in the background and asked if it was still an active situation? And I said, yes, this is an active shooter situation. I saw several people in exercise clothing running away from the scene, hiding behind trees and cars on my street. And then after the shooting died down, I went out and talked with one of the people to ask if he was okay, and he said he saw the original location of the shooter where he was hiding behind that concrete dugout in his first position. And he said that he had a rifle, and it was first shooting up in the air, and then he seemed to be shooting at random everything around him. But, of course, now we know that he was shooting at individual people.
Yeah, it seems so. Reba Winstead is an eyewitness to what unfolded at the baseball field, Simpson Park, in Alexandria, Virginia, by the alleged gunman James Hodgkinson, 66 years old, of Belleville, Illinois. And the FBI has declined to talk about a motive, but his social media profile indicates some anger at President Trump, support for Bernie Sanders. Not that you can necessarily judge too much from that, but it's something the FBI is clearly looking at. Reba, stay with us if you can. We're awaiting remarks now from President Trump at the White House. This is live coverage from ABC News. I'm Aaron Katersky. President Trump is about to make remarks on a shooting that injured Congressman Steve Scalise, the Republican whip, and several others, including a lobbyist for Tyson Foods, a legislative aide to another congressman, a couple of Capitol Police officers, all in Simpson Park in Alexandria, Virginia, where the Congressional Republican baseball team was practicing for tomorrow's scheduled game against the Democrats, a charity game that's held every year, this one at Nationals Park. No decision has been made as of yet whether this year's game will go on as scheduled. As we await President Trump's remarks on this, I want to bring back Reba Winstead, who was an eyewitness to this. We'll get to her in a minute. ABC's Karen Travers is with us now from the White House, where President Trump is about to make remarks. Karen.
Yeah, we're expecting these remarks to begin any second. We're actually told just a little detail by the reporters that are in the room. Stephen Miller, who's a senior advisor to the president, came in and got the person who's running the teleprompter out of the room, and now they're back and they're updating the remarks. So something maybe has been added or taken out of the president's speech, but we are expecting it any moment now. The president's just a little bit delayed. This will likely be, Aaron, the only time we see the president today. He canceled his remarks for the Labor Department that were scheduled for later this afternoon. I would think they will let this be the one response from the administration, from the White House. That said, the president, as we've seen already today, always can take to Twitter and weigh in as developments occur.
ABC's Karen Travers at the White House, where President Trump is about to make remarks on the shooting that injured a member of Congress, a legislative aide for another congressman, a lobbyist, and a couple of Capitol Police officers, all as they were preparing for a charity baseball game that's held every year. ABC's Jonathan Karl, our senior White House correspondent, reports to us that there is still a plan to play that game as scheduled tomorrow at Nationals Park. Karen, this is an annual thing, and it was well known that these congressmen were going to be at this field preparing for this game.
Published in news reports over the years. One congressman even had a press release on his website saying, the Republican congressional team will be practicing at this field at this time on this day. So some people pointing out now maybe they shouldn't have had all of that out there, but it wasn't a secret where they were practicing. Democrats doing the same thing this morning at a different location earlier in the day. But this game is a big tradition here in Washington. It dates back about 100 years. And, there's so much. We've talked about this just a few minutes ago, about the nasty partisan fights that are always ongoing in the nation's capital. And this is one chance to put a bit of that aside. Yes, there's friendly rivalry between the Republicans and the Democrats, but it's all for charity. And it attracts a big crowd to Nationals Park, where, of course, the Major League Baseball team plays. So it's a pretty big deal. I think it's interesting to see the reaction in the last couple hours on Twitter from folks here in D.C., some saying you shouldn't have the game tomorrow night. People are just really nervous and jittery, and the security would be an issue. And others are saying absolutely not. This game has to happen. Let's make it a bipartisan thing. Let's put it on television. Let's have the president come. I think there's certainly been this fighting back spirit to keep sports.
ABC's Karen Travers with us from the White House as we await remarks from President Trump, who's stepping to the podium now. You're listening to live coverage from ABC News.
As you all know, shortly after 7 a.m. this morning, a gunman opened fire on members of Congress and their staffs as they were practicing for tomorrow's annual charity baseball game. Authorities are continuing to investigate the crime, and the assailant has now died from his injuries. The FBI is leading the investigation and will continue to provide updates as new information becomes available. Congressman Steve Scalise, a member of House leadership, was shot and badly wounded and is now in stable condition at the hospital, along with two very courageous Capitol Police officers. At least two others were also wounded. Many lives would have been lost if not for the heroic actions of the two Capitol Police officers who took down the gunman despite sustaining gunshot wounds during a very, very brutal assault. Melania and I are grateful for their heroism and praying for the swift recovery of all victims. Congressman Scalise is a friend, and a very good friend. He's a patriot, and he's a fighter. He will recover from this assault. And Steve, I want you to know that you have the prayers not only of the entire city behind you, but of an entire nation and, frankly, the entire world. America is praying for you, and America is praying for all of the victims of this terrible shooting. I spoke with Steve's wife, Jennifer, and I pledged to her our full and absolute support, anything she needs. We're with her and with the entire Scalise family. I have also spoken with Chief Matthew Verderosa. He's doing a fantastic job, of the Capitol Police, to express our sympathies for his wounded officers and to express my admiration for their courage. Our brave Capitol Police perform a challenging job with incredible skill, and their sacrifice makes democracy possible. We also commend the brave first responders from Alexandria Police Fire and Rescue who rushed to the scene. Everyone on that field is a public servant. Our courageous police, our congressional aides who work so tirelessly behind the scenes with enormous devotion, and our dedicated members of Congress who represent our people. We may have our differences, but we do well in times like these to remember that everyone who serves in our nation's capital is here because, above all, they love our country. We can all agree that we are blessed to be Americans, that our children deserve to grow up in a nation of safety and peace, and that we are strongest when we are unified and when we work together for the common good. Please take a moment today to cherish those you love, and always remember those who serve and keep us safe. God bless them all. God bless you. And God bless America. Thank you.
Live from the White House, President Trump, who revealed the gunman in today's shooting in Alexandria, Virginia, James Hodgkinson, is dead. Of Congressman Steve Scalise, who was shot while practicing for the upcoming charity baseball game that members of Congress say will be played tomorrow as scheduled. He said, "You have the prayers of the entire nation behind you." I'm Aaron Katersky. You're listening to live coverage from ABC News. straight to the White House now again with ABC's Karen Travers. Karen.
Aaron, the president certainly went out of his way to make this bipartisan, or not partisan, I should say. He said that we may have our differences, but we do well in times like these to remember that everyone who serves here in the nation's capital, they're here because they love this country. He said everybody out there in that field was a public servant, not just the members of Congress, but the congressional staffers that were there, the Capitol Police. He said people who work so tirelessly here in this city. The president also, as we've heard from many leaders here in Washington today, thanking and commending the work of the Capitol Police. He says they perform a challenging job that makes democracy possible. I mean, certainly we have seen many times in recent years the role that the Capitol Police play in incidents, security threats, false alarms up on Capitol Hill. They're the front lines, not just at the Capitol, but around the city as well.
ABC's Karen Travers with us from the White House, where President Trump revealed the gunman, James Hodgkinson, has died after he was shot by police following the shooting spree that he began in Alexandria, Virginia, at the park where members of Congress, Republicans, were playing baseball and getting ready for tomorrow's charity game at Nationals Park that members say will go on as scheduled. Now, in about 15, 20 minutes' time, the House of Representatives is scheduled to open today, and the chamber will open with the remarks from House Speaker Paul Ryan and Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. Would expect them to echo the sentiments of the Senate leaders and also President Trump in an apolitical expression of thanks to the first responders and thoughts to those who were shot. It does seem, now that the president has confirmed Hodgkinson has died, that a total, including the suspect, of 6 people were shot. They are Congressman Steve Scalise, the House Majority Whip, Representative Roger Williams, legislative aide Zach Barth, a lobbyist for Tyson Foods, Matt Micah, 2 unidentified Capitol Police officers, and the shooter, James Hodgkinson, who the president said has since died. ABC's Kenneth Moten has been taking all of this in from the scene. Can we go to Kenneth now?
Hey, Aaron, I'm here.
Okay. This is a very large crime scene, the way the FBI describes it, because of the sheer volume of shell casings and I guess a couple of the nearby buildings that may have also been struck.
Right, and we saw those images of those bullet holes and the glass, not only the dugout on the baseball field, but some of the buildings that are right around that baseball field here in this large community area of Delray neighborhood. What we know is that, and what we can see is that there's maybe about a half mile on each side of that baseball field just surrounding this park are blocked off right now with yellow crime tape. And we've got local law enforcement assisting now what is now a FBI scene. Federal law enforcement who have taken over processing this scene as they look for more evidence. And Aaron, just to give you a little bit of what was happening at the time President Trump was speaking, there's been a lot of, obviously, talking, people trying to gather information, talking to witnesses. There was a little bit of a calm that spread over this scene, which has been, even though it's been a very large scene and the chaotic moments happened around the 7 o'clock hour. But as we've been trying to gather more information here, it's been very tense here. But a calm fell over this scene as the president spoke, and we learned that the suspected gunman, the shooter, was dead. And that's most likely why the news conference that we got from federal law enforcement officials and the governor of Virginia played out the way it did more than an hour ago, where they didn't give us exact details on the conditions of those who had been shot. We specifically asked about the gunman. We asked for his identification from where he came from. We asked about his condition and was he obviously shot or how many times he was hit, because we know there was a gunfight between the security detail for the majority whip and this gunman. And so at that point, they would not disclose that information. They would not give us details. They said it was things were fluid. It was too early. We know he was transported to the local hospital. There are a number of them in this area. We're only about 3 miles away from Reagan International Airport. We're only about 8 miles away from the Capitol. It's a very dense area where we know the neighborhoods and the area in and around Washington, D.C., is pretty dense. We know it's heavily populated, and at this point, we tried to learn more details about the gunman, they wouldn't give us those details. But it was the president who disclosed that the gunman has been pronounced dead after the shooting incident here, Aaron.
Yeah, the gunman dead, Kenneth, and according to George Washington University Hospital, 2 patients they received were in critical condition, but the Capitol police officers were said to be in good condition. So we're still waiting for additional details, but it does give you a sense of why President Trump called this a very brutal assault, given the apparent conditions of some of the victims. We are awaiting now Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, and Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, who will share their thoughts as the House chamber opens today. Also, we're hearing from some people who may have known the suspect, James Hodgkinson. He was the 66-year-old Illinois man who was pronounced dead by President Trump a short while ago after opening fire on members of Congress. And Kevin Kubitschek is on the line with us, an attorney in Belleville, Illinois. Kevin, thanks for your time. How did you know James Hodgkinson?
Well, I've known Tom since high school. I went to high school with him at Belleville Township's High School East and would see him periodically. I'm an attorney in Belleville and have been since '84, and he'd have occasion from time to time to call me or come in and see me, and I represented him on a few minor matters through the years.
It does seem, as we're digging into his criminal record, he had a number of petty offenses and mainly traffic violations.
That I don't have any knowledge of.
Kevin, I heard you refer to him as Tom. Is that how you knew him, as Tom, not James?
Yeah, it's James T. Hodgkinson, but middle name is Tom. I've always known him as Tom and called him Tom.
When was the last time you saw him or spoke to him?
I want to guess a couple of years ago. Occasionally, I'd go down the street to a local gas station, Motomart, and occasionally I'd run in to him there and, just kind of exchange pleasantries, nothing in depth.
We've been digging into his social media profile, and there are a number of posts that, in light of what has happened and what he has been accused of doing, have been raising eyebrows about some vehemence expressed at President Trump. Did you ever know him to be particularly political?
Well, I was asked that previously, and occasionally he'd have a letter to the editor in the Belleville News-Democrat, and I would have to say it was voicing a particular point of view, but it was nothing that had struck me as particularly vehement, certainly not that I recall being radical in nature.
Any violence in him that you knew?
Not that I knew, no.
When you first heard, just to gauge your reaction, that it was this person that you knew from where you are that had done this and that has now died because of it, according to President Trump, what went through your mind?
Well, I first heard the name James T. Hodgkinson, and I told my wife, I said, I know that fellow. And she goes, no, that's out in Virginia. And then they flashed it. They were speaking on the TV news, and they said he was from Bellevue, Illinois. And I go, and it's not Bellevue, it's Belleville. I said, that's got to be Tom Hodgkinson. So I was stunned.
No doubt. When it hits that close. He also was said to be armed with a long gun and a handgun. Had you known him as a gun enthusiast?
I did not. Like I said, I've known him since 1966 when I was in high school, and I knew him to talk to him in the hallways, or I'd see him around, chit-chat, that type of stuff, but we weren't what I would call, close friends. Certainly knew him to talk to him, shoot the breeze, but nothing in depth.
There are, as you say, you didn't know him to be particularly angry or politically radical, but I'm not sure if you've come to see any of his more recent social media postings. Had anything in his life that you had known or heard changed where he may have developed a more deep-seated anger at the president or at politics or the government in general?
Well, I don't know a great deal about social media. I'll say I'm not involved with it, even, being an attorney. But I like I said, I don't have in-depth knowledge of him or his political views. Obviously, since the last election, we've seen a lot of people say a lot of things about a lot of different political figures and political views. And like I said, in the recent years, I'd see occasionally a letter from him, which at first I was kind of surprised because he never struck me as being somebody who was political. I mean, again, saying that we weren't wasn't buddies or anything, so I didn't know that much about him.
Well, Kevin, I appreciate you sharing what you did know and recalling what you did know about James T. Hodgkinson, who you knew as Tom. That is Kevin Kubitschek, who is an attorney in Bellevue, Illinois, where the shooter was from. President Trump said a moment ago that James T. Hodgkinson has died of injuries he sustained in the shootout with Capitol Police in Alexandria, Virginia. It was interesting to hear Mr. Kubitschek recall him not particularly as political, the occasional letter to the editor, but nothing that would indicate the kind of anger and vehemence that we have seen expressed on social media that may, as the FBI begins to dig through it, help us explain something of the motive here. There are two victims in critical condition, according to the George Washington University Hospital where they were taken. Which two they are, we don't know, but we can presume it was the legislative aide to one of the congressmen who was shot and the lobbyist for Tyson Foods, who was also shot, because Representative Steve Scalise was in stable condition, last we heard, and the two police officers, the Capitol police officers, were said by the chief to be in good condition. So we are awaiting some additional details about the condition of those victims. We are also awaiting remarks from House Speaker Paul Ryan and Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. The House is in recess until about 5 minutes' time, at which point all members of the House have been invited into the opening of the chamber to hear these remarks. Senators did very much the same thing. All House votes have been canceled for the day. Capitol police officers inside the briefing for members of the House received a standing ovation. Democrats and Republicans prayed together at the start of a meeting for Democrats and Republicans. The leadership was going through the briefing about what they knew before they make these remarks in open session, and members of the Capitol Police were told received a standing ovation. There were at least 21 members of Congress at the baseball practice today where this shooting occurred, and we're told that the charity game, the annual charity game that's supposed to be held tomorrow at Nationals Park in Washington, D.C., will be going on as scheduled. We have not heard specifically whether there will be any additional security measures taken. We know generally that sports stadiums had been warned by the Department of Homeland Security after the bombing in Manchester, England, to be on heightened alert because sports stadiums had come under attack, and with the summer coming and outdoor events, we know that the Department of Homeland Security generally had been starting to warn arenas and stadiums just to be on their guard, but we're not aware of any specific measures that will be taken. At the Capitol, however, there is a more robust police presence, and the Capitol Police received a standing ovation during a private briefing for members of Congress before public remarks from the House Speaker and Democratic leader a short time from now. ABC's Karen Travers is with us from her post at the White House. Karen.
Aaron, just to comment on some of the security measures already in place at a stadium like Nationals Park. That's where the Major League Baseball team plays, and like many professional sports stadiums around the country, you already have to go through quite a process to get in. Everybody goes through the magnetometer, bags are checked, extra security wands are brought out. In fact, I was just there a couple weeks ago, not even for a baseball game, but for a charity walk with many children, not exactly a scenario that you'd think would be a target or any sort of dangerous incident. And everybody had to go through that same significant amount of security. So already you have at a place like that stepped up patrols and measures for individuals coming in. So if this game is on tomorrow night, there's already enough in place that they could prevent something from happening inside the stadium.
ABC's Karen Travers. Karen, what struck you about what the president said today?
I think the concerted effort he made to try and tamp down what we expect after these incidents of partisan political backlash. I mean, that, of course, is not going to make it go away now that we start seeing more of the social media post of the political beliefs and positions of this suspected shooter. But the president, I think, could have touched on all of that, and he didn't. He could have talked about policy, as we see that often happens in the wake of these incidents, or, should there have been more guns there to prevent something like this from happening? He didn't. He commended the work that was done by the Capitol Police officers. He commended the roles that people like the members of Congress and the staff play in making this city and this country function. And I think this line for the president's first time addressing a scenario like this, he said, "We do well in times like these to remember that everyone who serves in the nation's capital is here because above all, they love our country." Out there in the rest of the country, a lot of people have many thoughts about Washington and the negativeness and how harsh political climate it is. But, that's an important reminder that people choose to come here because they want to do good.
ABC's Karen Travers with us from her post at the White House, where it was left to President Trump to reveal that the suspect, James T. Hodgkinson, known in Belleville, Illinois as Tom, was died from injuries sustained in his shootout with Capitol Police at the baseball field in Alexandria, Virginia, where he opened fire with a long gun and handgun as 24 members of Congress in the Republican Party were practicing for an upcoming charity baseball game. We're told now that the Sheriff's Department in Illinois, where Hodgkinson was from, has been contacted, looking into his background now. Of course, we know that he does have a criminal record, mainly petty offenses and traffic offenses, and we heard from somebody who knew him since high school that, to him at least, he didn't have any particularly radical political views, but he hadn't spoken to him in a couple of years, and if you look on social media, the FBI is now pouring through accounts that do indicate at least some anger with the president, although nothing to indicate that he would take this kind of violent turn, as happened just after 7 o'clock this morning as the members of Congress were practicing for their charity baseball game. That game, by the way, will go on, according to members of both parties. We're waiting now for the House of Representatives to be opened. The House has been in recess until 12 noon Eastern Time, when House Speaker Paul Ryan and Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi are due to make remarks. A short time ago, there was a private briefing for lawmakers, at which time members of the Capitol Police were given a standing ovation. As we've understood from eyewitnesses what happened, the gunshots rang out from the third base side of the practice field. There was James Hodgkinson with his long gun and his handgun opening fire. The eyewitnesses have described the bullets spraying the infield dirt around and then lawmakers hitting the deck. The Capitol Police officers were sitting on the first base side, came across the field to engage the shooter. All of this went on for at least 5 minutes or so as the shooter took cover for a while behind the third base dugout. We're trying to figure out if he had some kind of training or maybe a military background. The only job we've been able to find of his is that he was a home inspector, like for mold and air quality, that kind of thing. But he was not working while he spent the last couple of months in Alexandria, Virginia, according to his wife when we spoke to her from her home in Illinois. She didn't even know he was connected to this when we had talked to her. Capitol Police were then joined by Alexandria Police and were told that the suspect was firing at police. Police were returning fire, and we were told that 2 people were brought to George Washington University Hospital in critical condition. Now, who those people were, we're not sure, but we know that Steve Scalise, the congressman, was said to be in stable condition. It's come out of surgery now. We know the Capitol Police officers were said to be in good condition, and so we're waiting to find out the condition of the lobbyist, Matt Micah of Tyson Foods, who was hit, and the legislative aide for another one of the congressmen. He was also struck by bullets, and we're waiting to find out his condition as well. We're also awaiting remarks from House Speaker Paul Ryan and Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi. But while we do that, let's go back to the scene in Alexandria with ABC's Kenneth Moten. Kenneth.
Aaron, I'm on the move again to move back around to that outfield area where when I first joined you for our live coverage, and it's still a very large scene that's blocked off even hours later, somewhat 4-5 hours later after the gunfire started at that baseball field in this Delray neighborhood community. And as I'm walking, I hear the chirps of the bird. I see this beautifully manicured lawn because this is a neighborhood that is not used to something like this. They say that they're about community, and many of them use that baseball field and that park where those gunshots and that gunman opened fire. And at this point, what we know is that federal law enforcement officials, the FBI, they have taken control of the scene from local police, who were the first responders on this scene. Obviously, there were Capitol Police officers, part of that security detail for the majority whip, who were on the scene firing those shots back at it. It was described to us as a gunfight, and we obviously know we don't know exactly if it was the case of the law enforcement officers who actually fired the shots that ultimately led to the death of this suspected gunman, James Hodgkinson, but we do know that there was a gunfight. There were obviously the person who they were trying to protect, those law enforcement officers, that security detail. If we know the way this played out, they were obviously not on the field surrounding, because we know here in Washington, when Secret Service or Capitol Police are protecting their protectee, as they call them, they are close to them at all times, especially out in the public. But if they're practicing for a charity baseball game, there would be no reason for them to be exactly where he was on the field. And we understand if he was on second base as a sitting duck, as one lawmaker who was here described it, that means they were close by, but they weren't on the field. And that means they would have rushed toward the gunfire, toward their protectee, to make sure that he was safe as well after he was struck and hit in the hip and hit the ground. And so we understand when those law enforcement officers were injured and shot, they were able to return fire. We know that lawmakers who were there were also not only scurrying to find safety, be protected and hunker down, but they were also pretty much yelling, pointing where the gunfire was coming from. And those law enforcement officers were able to pretty much go to the threat while trying to protect their person as well. All those details, are waiting for more of that to come out from those federal law enforcement officers who gave us an update more than an hour ago. But, Aaron, take a moment to take this in. The fact that here in this neighborhood, it's been a very tense scene. It's a very large perimeter. We've seen law enforcement officers scurrying in and out of the crime scene, taken out of the area as they process the scene. And the moment that President Trump spoke to give the news that the suspected gunman had been killed, there was a calm that fell over this area. We saw law enforcement pretty much stop in their tracks as well as they walked back and forth from the baseball field to the outside of the perimeter. And so there was that calm that fell once the president made that announcement, Aaron.
ABC's Kenneth Moton with us from Alexandria, Virginia, and the scene of this shooting where nearly 24 members of Congress and then more of their staffs and lobbyists and others were gathered for baseball practice ahead of tomorrow's charity game at Nationals Park. That game, by the way, is scheduled to go on, and there was applause, we're told, from a private briefing with lawmakers when House Speaker Paul Ryan announced that the game would go on as scheduled. They'll do so for charity and in honor of the Capitol Police that helped bring down the shooter, James T. Hodgkinson. As we've been looking in his social media profile, we see posts against President Trump and for Bernie Sanders. Senator Sanders spoke a moment ago on the Senate floor.
Madam President, I have just been informed that the alleged shooter at the Republican baseball practice this morning is someone who apparently volunteered on my presidential campaign. I am sickened by this despicable act, and let me be as clear as I can be. Violence of any kind is unacceptable in our society, and I condemn this action in the strongest possible terms. Real change can only come about through nonviolent action, and anything else runs counter to our most deeply held American values. I know I speak for the entire country in saying that my hopes and prayers are that Representative Scalise congressional staff, and the Capitol Police officers who were wounded make a quick and full recovery. I also want to thank the Capitol Police for their heroic actions to prevent further harm. Thank you, Madam President.
Bernie Sanders on the Senate floor a short while ago, learning, as he said there, that James T. Hodgkinson, the suspected shooter from Belleville, Illinois, was a volunteer on his presidential campaign. Sanders said he is sickened by this despicable act. He said violence of any kind is unacceptable, and he condemned the shooting in the strongest possible terms. Hodgkinson's motive has not been released by the FBI, but he did have a number of rather angry-sounding posts on social media about President Trump, but nothing to indicate specifically that he wanted to target Representative Scalise or these Republican members, but may have just acted out of this kind of political anger. We'll see. Again, what's on a Facebook page doesn't necessarily tell you everything you need to know about a person. So we're still waiting for the FBI to give us more information about the shooter, James T. Hodgkinson, who President Trump revealed a short while ago has died of his injuries. So there will not be a trial or any kind of public airing. It will be left to the FBI or police to tell us what exactly was behind some of this. President Trump spoke a short while ago, and now we're waiting for House Speaker Paul Ryan and also Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi to make remarks as the House chamber opens. I want to turn back to ABC's Karen Travers at the White House for more of her thoughts as to what's gone on in Washington today. Karen, who we will get to in a moment as she monitors developments at the White House. The president canceled his schedule, and so we are unlikely to see him again beyond what we just heard from him a short while ago when he he called it a very brutal assault, which it clearly was, and he revealed that the gunman has died from his injuries. He also indicated, the president did, that he spoke with Congressman Steve Scalise of Louisiana, the majority whip, and he called him a good friend, a patriot, a fighter, and said he would recover from this assault. And he said that the entire nation is behind you, a direct message to Steve Scalise. We heard from a number of members of Congress about how the Capitol Police wouldn't have been there this morning had Scalise not been there practicing with them, because he, as majority whip, gets a security detail where the others don't. Alexandria police were there within 3 minutes, but by that time, the bullets had already been flying for quite some time. And we know, if you include the shooter, that 6 people have been shot. We're waiting for confirmation about the extent of the injuries. We know the Capitol Police officers that were hit were said to be in good shape. Scalise is stable, but George Washington University Hospital took 2 people who were in critical condition. Now, one of those could have been the shooter, who has since died. We don't know. But we know a lobbyist and a legislative aide who worked for another representative on Capitol Hill were also shot. We're waiting for further details, perhaps from House Speaker Paul Ryan when he opens the House chamber a short time from now. All of this has gone on as the congressmen get ready to play this annual charity baseball game. And that is going to be going on as scheduled at Nationals Park. Baseball stadiums have already, been warned by the Department of Homeland Security that this is a time of heightened security, given what happened in Manchester and the explosion outside the concert there a short time back in England. So whether there'll be any additional security, we don't know. But on the Capitol today, at the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol is in for a more robust police presence, according to Capitol Police, who were given a standing ovation in a private briefing for lawmakers a short while ago about what happened in Alexandria, Virginia. ABC's Kenneth Moten is on scene where the FBI has still been collecting evidence. They've been going through shell casings on the field, on the infield dirt, the outfield grass, and some of the nearby buildings. Kenneth, I know you spoke to a number of the eyewitnesses, all who made mention about the safety and secure feeling of Alexandria, Virginia. Now, as people have gotten on about their day, sense of calm prevail yet?
There is a sense of calm as law enforcement go about their work around this area. I said earlier I was on the move to go back to the outfield area of that baseball field where we have a clear view of where this all played out, those horrific and horrifying moments in the 7 o'clock hour. And at this point, police have pretty much put up a bigger barrier. They have put up a bigger perimeter around that baseball field because earlier when I was here, literally was holding on to the fence of that outfield there. And so at this point, we see some officers who are still surrounding that baseball field. No activity happening exactly on the field, even though I do see investigators near that dugout, which we know was struck by those bullets after the shooter was over behind third base on the outside there shooting in. And we understand, again, that police was on second base and he was shot in the hip there, suffering that non-life-threatening injury, and his protective detail was the one that returned fire at the gunman there. And so at this point, Aaron, we've been talking a lot about President Trump's remarks. We've been talking with those eyewitnesses as well about the rhetoric. And as Karen Travers mentioned at the White House, the president did not take that time to increase that rhetoric and talk about gun control or safety or issues like that, or divisive issues that we've seen him talk about on Twitter or even on the campaign season last year. And what we heard from the president was, yes, saying that the shooter was dead, saying thoughts and prayers with those members of Congress, or 21 who were out here on that field, a couple of senators, House members, a number of other people, families were out here even at that early hour before those legislative members obviously went back to the Hill to start the legislative day. But they were here practicing for that big charity game. And so when we talked to those eyewitnesses, it came up about the rhetoric, about the divisive nature of politics of Washington and what's happening now, especially in the past 5 months since President Trump took office. And we know that it's an ongoing issue as it all increases, as members who are sitting at home, who are listening right now, probably feel that Washington is not listening to them. And obviously we don't know the motive of this suspected gunman. We know what's on that Facebook page. We know the voices that have been raised and yelling and talking pretty loudly about divisive politics here in this country. And apparently it all led to this baseball field here in Alexandria, Virginia.
Kenneth Moten of ABC News in Alexandria at the field where this shooting took place. The suspect, James T. Hodgkinson of Belleville, Illinois, is dead, as announced a short while ago by President Trump. There are said to be some critical injuries in all of this, along with more minor injuries to Representative Steve Scalise and 2 members of the Capitol Police Department. The political environment in which all of this has happened has been something of a concern, a hyper-polarized political environment, how this might influence this type of violence. I want to turn to Steve Gomez, an ABC News consultant formerly of the FBI. How concerning is that, and I know the FBI is just getting into what the motive here might have been, how concerning is that generally?
Well, it's very concerning because this could be the start of something that's worse, basically a pattern of politically motivated violence that starts to occur throughout our country. I mean, we not to scare everybody, but if this suspect, if he was exhibiting that kind of hatred for...
Hold on, Steve. Let me just interrupt you for a second as House Speaker Paul Ryan opens the House chamber.
Let us pray. Almighty God, on a day when violence has come to this assembly, we ask your blessing on our brother, Representative Steve Scalise, the 2 officers and the staffer who have been shot. Bless the hands of those who tend to their injuries. We as Americans are blessed by a free and open society with rights secured by law and the Constitution. But once again, we are reminded that there is a vulnerability that comes with that openness. May we all be vigilant in being good citizens, neighbors, and defenders of our way of life at a time when so many challenges to our way of life and government seem under siege. We thank you for the men and women who respond to the crises that befall us, especially the Capitol Police and all first responders. May their heroism and generosity of spirit be an inspiration to us all, and may they be assured of our appreciation of their service. And in this great silence, as we are gathered most dramatically as this assembly, the People's House, may Republicans and Democrats be mindful of the rare companionship they share. Men and women who have taken very public responsibility for our country that carries so many burdens, and today the reminder, shared danger. May this day be characterized by kindness, goodwill, and compassion one to another. God bless America, and may all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
Amen.
House Chamber.
The Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House's approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. The Chair will lead the House in the Pledge of Allegiance and invites the members of the gallery to join. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chris was shot this morning while practicing for a charity baseball game. We're awaiting Speaker Ryan's remarks, and then remarks from Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic leader.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
I ask to revise and extend my remarks and address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
My colleagues, there are very strong emotions throughout this House today. We are all horrified by this dreadful attack on our friends and on our colleagues and those who serve and protect this Capitol. We are all praying for those who are attacked and for their families. Steve Scalise, Zachary Barth, Matt Micah, Special Agent David Bailey, Special Agent Crystal Griner. We are all giving our thoughts to those currently being treated for their injuries at this moment. And we are united. We are united in our shock. We are united in our anguish. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. I know we want to give our thanks to the first responders and to the Alexandria Police Department who are on the scene in minutes. And I know this House wants to state unequivocally that we are, as ever, awed by the tremendous bravery of the Capitol Police. I spoke with Special Agent Bailey and Special Agent Griner this morning. One was being treated and one was about to go into surgery. I expressed our profound gratitude to them it is clear to me, based on various eyewitness accounts, that without these two heroes, Agent Bailey and Agent Griner, many lives would have been lost. I know that we all want to learn as much as we can about what happened. We just all received a briefing from the Sergeant of Arms. I have complete confidence in the investigation that's being conducted by the Capitol Police, the FBI, who are also working with local law enforcement. I know we want to extend our gratitude for the outpouring of support that we've received from throughout the Capitol and from throughout the country. And now, knowing Steve Scalise, as we all do, he is likely really frustrated that he's not going to be able to play in the baseball game. I also know that Steve wants all of us to commend the bravery of those who came to the aid of the wounded. In the coming days, we will hear their stories, and we will have the chance to hold up their heroism. My colleagues, there are so many memories from this day that we will want to forget, and there are so many images that we will not want to see again. But there is one image in particular that this House should keep, and that is a photo I saw this morning of our Democratic colleagues gathered in prayer this morning after hearing the news. You know, every day we come here to test and to challenge each other. We feel so deeply about the things that we fight for and the things that we believe in. At times, our emotions can clearly get the best of us. We're all imperfect. But we do not shed our humanity when we enter this chamber. For all the noise and all the fury, we are one family. These were our brothers and sisters in the line of fire. These were our brothers and sisters who ran into danger and saved countless lives. So before this House returns to its business, let's just slow down and reflect, to think about how we're all being tested right now, because we are being tested right now. I ask each of you to join me to resolve to come together, to lift each other up, and to show the country, to show the world that we are one house, the people's house, united in our humanity. It is that humanity which will win the day, and it always will. God bless. I yield.
Ryan, who said, "We are all horrified by this dreadful attack on our friends and our colleagues and on those who protect this Capitol." He named those who were shot, not only Congressman Steve Scalise, but also legislative aide Zach Barth, Matt Micah, who is a lobbyist, and two Capitol Police officers, David Bailey and Crystal Griner. Members of the House of Representatives on their feet. Here's Nancy Pelosi.
Purposes, General Lady
Democratic
from
leader now.
California seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to join the distinguished speaker in paying tribute to the brave men and women of the Capitol Police Force, and also in sadness for the assault that was made on our colleagues and members of the staff. To my colleagues, you're going to hear me say something you've never heard me say before. I identify myself with the remarks of the speaker. They're beautiful remarks, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much. For the sentiments that they represent, thank you so much. Again, we are not one caucus or the other in this House today, but we speak for each other in saying that we send our thoughts and prayers to our colleague, Steve Scalise. Personally, we have our Italian-American connection, so as soon as I heard his name, I was filled with concern, as I would be for anyone here, but we have that special connection, so our hopes and prayers. And I said to the Speaker, I'll be asking you every 5 minutes, how is Steve coming along? And also for Zach Barth in Congressman Roger Williams' office, Matt Micah, who was a former staffer, and of course, as the Speaker acknowledged, Crystal Griner and David Bailey. and acknowledging their sacrifice and how fortunate we all were that they were on the scene, because other lives would have probably been lost. I want us to remember that every single day, the Capitol Police protects all of us, takes risk for us. And while a day like this is a time when we can focus on it, so sadly, it doesn't mean that other days aren't as challenging. And I especially want to call attention to Detective John Gibson and Officer Jacob Chestnut, who almost 19 years ago, 1988 it was, in July, lost their lives protecting the Congress, the Capitol. And not just the members of Congress, the staff, the press, and our visitors, people who come to see this Capitol, this great edifice to democracy known throughout the world. So they are protecting a great deal. And it is an attraction. And that makes it all the more risky. You may not know this, my colleagues, but every time I pray, which is very frequently, and certainly every Sunday, I pray for all of you together. In the earlier years, I used to pray for your happiness, for the fact that we would, working together, heed the words of President Kennedy in the closing of his inaugural address when he said, "May God's work must truly be our own." How do we view what God's will is for us? How do we come together to give confidence to the American people that, as our founders intended, we would have our disagreements and we would debate them and we would have confidence in our beliefs and humility to listen to others? But in more recent years, I have been praying not only for that, but for our safety. As I, above anyone in here, and I can say that quite clearly, have been probably the target of more, I'm the political target and therefore the target of more threats than anyone, perhaps other than the President of the United States, Barack Obama. And so I prayed for Barack Obama. And now I continue to pray for him. And I pray for Donald Trump, that his presidency will be successful and that his family will be safe. Because it is about family. We are called for a purpose to this body. It's a great thing. And we know what it means to each of us to serve, and we recognize that in others. And we also recognize that you have your constituents, we have ours, and we respect you and your constituents who sent you here, all worthy of respect. But we do have our differences. And so I pray, my prayer is that we can resolve our differences in a way that furthers the preamble to the Constitution, takes us closer to e pluribus unum. And today, again, it's in the family. It's an injury in the family for the staff and for our colleague and for his leadership. As I mentioned just a minute ago in the Fuller thing, sports are a wonderful thing in our country. Probably one of the most unified. I think the arts, we like to say music or plays or whatever, but sports really bring us together in our cities. You see people who have the biggest differences of opinion on politics, and yet when their team is on the field, people come together. People come together. So when this team was on the field practicing with such camaraderie and such brotherhood, I don't know if you have any sisters on your team. We have two on our team. For this person to take this action was so cowardly. So cowardly. We'll learn more about motivation and the rest of that. But it seems particularly sad, although any violent death, of course, is sad, but particularly sad that at a time when people want us to come together and we're prepared to come together tomorrow night, that this assault would be made. But we cannot let that be a victory for the assailant or anyone who would think that way. So tomorrow we'll go out on the field, we'll root for our team, we want everyone to do his or her very best, and we will use this occasion as one that brings us together and not separates us further. And with that, again, I want to thank the Speaker for bringing us together, and again, with endless gratitude to our Capitol Police, in particular today, of course, Crystal Griner, David Bailey, but never out of our prayers, Detective John Gibson and Officer Jacob Chestnut. Thank you, my colleagues, for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you on this sad day. Steve and others, you are deeply in our prayers. We count the minutes until you return. Please convey that to him, Mr. Speaker. Thank you all.
That's Capitol. Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi addressing members of the House of Representatives at the opening of their session today. She and House Speaker Paul Ryan each identified those who were shot. In addition to Congressman Steve Scalise, the majority whip, there was Zach Barth, who was a legislative aide in one of the offices, Matt Micah, a lobbyist for Tyson Foods, who used to work in one of the congressional offices for Vito Fossella of Staten Island. There were two Capitol Police officers who were also injured, David Bailey and Crystal Griner, and you heard Paul Ryan say that without them there providing the security they were for the majority whip, he gets a security detail where others do not, that lives could have been lost. We're still waiting to affirm the conditions of those who were shot. We know the officers were said to be in good shape. Scalise stable after surgery, but one of the others shot was taken to the hospital in critical condition, so we are awaiting word on that. And then the vow from Speaker Ryan that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us, and the House stood united in applauding that sentiment and those from the Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. I'm Aaron Katersky, and you're listening to live coverage from ABC News. I want to get back to the scene in Alexandria, Virginia, with ABC's Kenneth Moten. Kenneth, you're up on Capitol Hill quite frequently, and a moment of pause, certainly, from the two leaders there to make sure that people are appropriately wired to the political climate and maybe what it is and what it should be.
Exactly. It was a very stirring moment, Aaron, as we heard two leaders in the House. And I say, as I spoke with eyewitnesses, those were words they also talked about, the fact that this country needed to hear something like that as we try to tamp down the rhetoric. There, in the past few months, especially since President Trump has taken office, we know on Capitol Hill that rhetoric has only increased from all sides, from Democrats, from Republicans, and that moment has been pretty intense, probably for the average American. And obviously, while there are no excuses for what happened on this baseball field, I'm looking at right now this scene of a mass shooting where a number of people innocent folks were injured with non-life-threatening injuries, as we understand it. There are no excuses. Even if the rhetoric is at its hottest, there was no reason for this gunman to open fire on this people in this community baseball field. And so the people who live around here, obviously the crackle of that gunfire have shocked them and shaken their lives at this moment. And for everything that they've known about this neighborhood, there's a playground that I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at the outfield. I'm looking at these homes that are literally surrounding this community baseball field where these GOP members, Democratic members earlier, were practicing for this big charity game tomorrow at Nationals Park. And so as we take in the scene, we know that federal law enforcement officers, the FBI, they've taken control of this area. A few hours ago, obviously, they were heavier in this area as they gathered evidence. But as we got the update from the FBI, Capitol Police, we know that they're canvassing this area. We know they're looking for evidence, even at this hour, hours after the shooting occurred, because they want to make sure they don't leave any stone unturned. And so, Aaron, yes, we know there is plenty of time to talk about not only what led to the shooting, was it the rhetoric, was it the partisan politics that we see in this country that led to this angry individual who then went from Illinois to Virginia to target these members, these congressional members who, yes, it was well publicized that they practice here. It would probably be very easy for him to look online to find this soft target. And, Aaron, I think we haven't really discussed this morning that this was a soft target. When there is any type of shooting or mass shooting in this country, we just commemorated the 1-year anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, where these are these soft targets. So even if you had a majority whip, Steve Scalise, who had a security detail, had law enforcement officers close by in that dugout surrounding him or near him as he's standing out on the field practicing, this is still considered a soft target where you would have members of the community standing out in this park, standing on the field, and then a gunman can open fire. And so will this all lead to a greater debate about guns, since this definitely now includes members who could do something about it, members who make the laws? That remains to be seen. But when we've seen other high-profile shootings, many political watchers would say not much happened thereafter, after Newtown, after Pulse, after San Bernardino, and the list goes on and on. Aaron, you've been there on the ground literally hours after some of these mass shootings have happened, but this one directly impacts the people who make the laws. So will anything change? Some of those eyewitnesses that I spoke with this morning, they question the same thing. And I think obviously that debate will happen.
ABC's Kenneth Moton on scene in Alexandria, Virginia, where Congressman Steve Scalise and others were shot and wounded. The gunman, James T. Hodgkinson, has died of his injuries, as President Trump announced a short while ago. And moments ago, we heard from the two leaders in the House of Representatives opening the chamber. Votes were called off for the morning, so the chamber just opened. And you heard House Speaker Paul Ryan speak about the image of the Democratic baseball team bowing in prayer at their practice after they heard what had happened to the Republican team. And Speaker Ryan said, for all the noise and fury, we are one family. And they paid tribute to the Capitol police officers who were involved in subduing the shooter, who has since died. And they also paid tribute to the what should, they said, be the harmonious nature of the House. And Speaker Ryan acknowledged that is not always the case, but he said an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. A moment ago, our congressional correspondent, Mary Bruce, spoke to Congressman Joe DeSantis. He had talked about telling police of an encounter with a man who had asked whether it was Democrats or Republicans on that baseball field. And Mary wanted to talk to him more about whether, now that we know the shooter's identity, whether that was the guy.
If you don't mind, explain to us again what you saw this morning.
So it was a normal practice. I was taking ground balls at third. Jeff Duncan, South Carolina, short. Steve Scalise was at second, where he got shot. Jeff and I decided we had had enough of a workout. We wanted to beat the traffic back to the hill. So we left probably 5 to 10 minutes before the shots fired. When we went to the parking lot, I got in the car, Jeff got in the passenger seat. It was one of his aides was driving us, and an individual came up to us and said, hey, is that Republicans or Democrats? It was a little odd. I kind of thought to myself, man, that's odd, because this is like 7 in the morning. I mean, why would you be out there? We drove away, but as minute that we heard the news, Jeff and I immediately looked at each other, called each other, said, hey, we got to report this guy. So we reported the individual's description to the police, and now since he's been identified and we've seen his photo, Jeff and I both believe that individual who's been identified as the shooter is the same individual that approached us in the parking lot 5 to 10 minutes before the shots.
So you've seen his photo. The man identified as the shooter you believe is the one who came up and asked your political affiliation.
That's correct.
And you knew instantly because he was that suspicious? What was his demeanor like when he spoke?
I didn't know he was going to shoot people. It just was a little bit strange because you're out there at 7 in the morning, 7:50. I mean, to someone to come out like that, we've done a lot of practices, no one ever does that. So it's just a little odd. Not odd to the extent you think someone's going to open fire, but once the news came out, you immediately think back to that encounter, and you're like, okay, we got to report, because there's not that many people who are out there at this time. And then sure enough, once we saw the photos, we both agreed that was him.
Have you had a moment to let that sink in yet?
Well, I think there's two things. I mean, obviously, one, just the prayers of the people that were injured, including Steve Scalise. But then, I'm thinking, had I stayed at third base, had Jeff stayed at shortstop, we're even closer to the line of fire than Scalise was. What would have happened to us? And I've had a number of my teammates come by and say, if you didn't leave when you did, you wouldn't be here right now. And so these are just things that happen. I don't think I've quite come to terms with that, to be honest with you. And then we want to kind of figure out the motivation and understand why someone would do this, and praying for the people that did get injured, they pull through okay. I think they are. The news has been good.
And so much conversation now about the Capitol Police that were there because Leader Scalise was there. Does it make you reconsider the kind of security that you have with you on a daily basis, that members have when they're gathered together, even if it is at a baseball field?
Well, it's interesting. Scalise gets his security because he's in leadership. Had Scalise not been there, I think it would have been a massacre today because there would have been no way to defend yourself. But we typically don't worry about security as much when we're off campus in the D.C. area. It's obviously this area is secured, Capitol building, the office buildings. When you go back to your district, a lot of the security personnel here stress security at your office, security at your town hall. But if we're kind of in like a Virginia suburb, a lot of people don't know that you're even a member of Congress. And so we haven't really focused on security in those instances. Obviously, when you have 10, 15 members of Congress in the same area, given some of the things going on in this world, you may have to reconsider some of this.
And did you have an opportunity to go down? Were you in this briefing just now that members received? Can you tell us any more about the mood in that
I have
meeting?
not had a chance to get down to the briefing. I'm heading, you grabbed me right from, I'm going to go to the House floor. The Speaker's going to address us. But I've basically been fielding all kind of inquiries. I mean, a lot of friends wondering about, because they don't even know that I was out there, but they're like, well, I know you're a baseball, because I played baseball in college. I know you're a baseball player. I just want to make sure you're okay. So talking, my wife, my family, making sure they know I'm all right, and then just offering whatever insight I could to law enforcement, which we've done. Obviously, the suspect has now passed away, but I think some of the info we're learning about him is very troubling.
And just to go back to this, given your conversation that you believe you had with the man who you believe was the shooter, is it your understanding that this was politically motivated, given your conversation with him?
In and of itself, no. It was a little bit of an abrasive question, but not to the point I think someone's going to open fire. But then looking at some of his Facebook postings and some of his political rantings, it seems like in hindsight it was a question to really determine partisanship rather than just figure out who he was watching.
That is Congressman DeSantis with ABC's congressional correspondent Mary Bruce, who spoke a short while ago before House Speaker Paul Ryan had addressed members on the House floor. It was Congressman DeSantis who James T. Hodgkinson approached prior to opening fire just after 7 a.m. and asked whether it was Democrats or Republicans on the field. Congressman DeSantis remembered the encounter as strange and after the shooting went to police to inform them of what had happened. Hodgkinson is dead, according to President Trump, died of his injuries that he received in a shootout with Capitol Police. And there has still been no specific motive ascribed, but it does seem, as you look through the social media posts of Hodgkinson, that he did have some anger directed at the president, though nothing to indicate that he was about to open fire. I want to turn to ABC's Steve Gomez, our consultant on law enforcement matters, formerly of the FBI. Steve, it would seem easy to say, angry at the president, volunteered for Bernie Sanders, guy opens fire, but the FBI isn't going to make such a conclusion that quickly, are they?
No, they're not. They're really going to dig further into his background, not just some Facebook posts and maybe some rhetoric or his volunteering for the Bernie Sanders campaign. They're really going to look at going back further as to what took him to that point where he had this type of anger and then a reaction, a violent, reaction and attacking the Congress members. Because something like this, maybe the Facebook posts indicate that was the straw that broke the camel's back, that, President Trump was elected and so on, and his policies. But it goes further than that. These are anger issues. These are mental health issues. So it's a question of what got him to that point, and then was this just the final trigger, the last 6 months, 7 months of the, between the election and then the change in administration and the policies that are being set forth. They're going to be looking at all of that to try to figure out how did he get to this point.
That is Steve Gomez, an ABC News consultant, formerly of the FBI. Steve, you worked in St. Louis. That's right near Belleville, Illinois.
Exactly. I worked in St. Louis. The area on the southern Illinois side is very similar to the St. Louis territory on the eastern Missouri side. And so there are a lot of people that ascribe to the anti-U.S. government anarchist mentality. And it's concerning. I mean, we talk a lot about international terrorism. Domestic terrorism is probably as important and critical, if not even more so, in the Middle America, because there's just that many people that believe in that mentality and do not want to comply with U.S. policy.
Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News consultant, as the FBI begins to dig into the background of James T. Hodgkinson. He was known as Tom around Belleville, Illinois, according to a friend we spoke with that knew him, and somebody who had written the odd letter to the editor in his local paper expressing some degree of political view, but nobody who had been thought to have been capable of opening fire on a member of Congress and other staffers at a baseball practice for the annual charity game between Republicans and Democrats that will go on tomorrow night as scheduled at Nationals Park. ABC's Karen Travers is with us from her post at the White House. Karen, the president effectively cleared a schedule today to be on the phone and to make brief remarks that we heard in which he confirmed the shooter was dead. He also declined to go there when it came to ascribing motive.
Yeah, it was a remarkably partisan, politically free statement from the president. And I think many were perhaps expecting him to wade into policy or something political, because we haven't seen him do any sorts of speech like this before. It's the first time he's responded to an incident like this. But he was notably partisan free. He said, we may have our differences, but in times like these, it's good to remember that everyone who serves in the nation's capital is here because they love this country. The president didn't have anything on his public schedule until 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. So he didn't necessarily clear his schedule, but the rest of the day, he is not expected to have any more public events. But we were expecting a potential for a White House briefing at some point. Whether or not that was on camera or not, we have not been told, but still no update on whether we'll hear from any member of the president's communications team.
Karen, can I speak not necessarily as a White House correspondent, but as somebody who lives and works in Washington, D.C.? It's a company town. And I was struck by something Nancy Pelosi said, where it's Capitol Police or police in general that keep everybody who works in D.C. Safe. Does the city itself seem, as you're able to tell it anyway, shaken by this?
No, not that I can tell. I mean, checking in with friends across the city who are in politics, not in politics, everybody hyper plugged into the news because that's what people do here in Washington. One of my friends lives about 2 blocks away from there and said she didn't even know it had happened until she was driving into work and was hearing about it on the radio. So kind of remarkable. The helicopters are literally flying over her house and didn't know about it. And she went to work in her federal building right off of the National Mall. I think the importance of the Capitol Police, you hear so much more about the Secret Service because they're the ones with the earpieces with the president. They're very visible. They are often talked about in pop culture, media, television, all of that. But the Capitol Police have played such an important role in recent years. I remember it was nearly 20 years ago now being an intern on Capitol Hill when there was that shooting at one of the entrances. A man came in with a gun and shot a Capitol police officer, sending the whole place into lockdown in the summer of 1998. That was an incredible moment and a very scary moment for everybody working up there. We were all on lockdown in our offices in the congressional buildings for several hours. And in recent years, there was a woman who led police on a high-speed chase from the White House up to Capitol Hill during the government shutdown back in October of 2013. She was eventually shot by the Capitol police officers before she rammed her car into anything up there, putting any people or buildings in jeopardy up on Capitol Hill. So while the Capitol Police don't get all of the media glory through television and movies, they play such a critical role in protecting members of Congress and the buildings up there, which are remarkably open. You can't come in here to the White House unless you're cleared in. You can't go into the Treasury Department unless you're cleared in. But you can go to the Capitol building. It's incredible. It's not just a working building for members of Congress and the House and Senate, but it's essentially a tourist stop, too. You go through the visitor center, and then you can wander around and look at the beautiful stairways, artwork, rotundas. It's quite an incredible place, and it's the Capitol Police that make that possible.
ABC's Karen Travers with us from her post at the White House, where President Trump made remarks about this just moments ago.
As you all know, shortly after 7 a.m. this morning, A gunman opened fire on members of Congress and their staffs as they were practicing for tomorrow's annual charity baseball game. Authorities are continuing to investigate the crime, and the assailant has now died from his injuries. The FBI is leading the investigation and will continue to provide updates as new information becomes available. Congressman Steve Scalise, a member of House leadership, was shot and badly wounded and is now in stable condition at the hospital, along with two very courageous Capitol Police officers. At least two others were also wounded. Many lives would have been lost if not for the heroic actions of the two Capitol Police officers who took down the gunman despite sustaining gunshot wounds during a very, very brutal assault. Melania and I are grateful for their heroism and praying for the swift recovery of all victims. Congressman Scalise is a friend, and a very good friend. He's a patriot, and he's a fighter. He will recover from this assault. And Steve, I want you to know that you have the prayers not only of the entire city behind you, but of an entire nation and, frankly, the entire world. America is praying for you, and America is praying for all of the victims of this terrible shooting. I spoke with Steve's wife, Jennifer, and I pledged to her our full and absolute support, anything she needs. We're with her and with the entire Scalise family. I have also spoken with Chief Matthew Verderosa. He's doing a fantastic job of the Capitol Police to express our sympathies for his wounded officers and to express my admiration for their courage. Our brave Capitol Police perform a challenging job with incredible skill, and their sacrifice makes democracy possible. We also commend the brave first responders from Alexandria Police Fire and Rescue who rushed to the scene. Everyone on that field is a public servant. Our courageous police, our congressional aides who work so tirelessly behind the scenes with enormous devotion, and our dedicated members of Congress who represent our people. We may have our differences, but we do well in times like these to remember that everyone who serves in our nation's capital is here because, above all, they love our country. We can all agree that we are blessed to be Americans, that our children deserve to grow up in a nation of safety and peace, and that we are strongest when we are unified and when we work together for the common good. Please take a moment today to cherish those you love and always remember those who serve and keep us safe. God bless them all. God bless you. And God bless America. Thank you.
President Trump at the White House a short while ago making remarks that included a confirmation of the death of the shooter, James T. Hodgkinson, who shot a top Republican congressman and several others while they practiced baseball in Alexandria, Virginia. ABC's Kenneth Moten is at that scene and with us live. Kenneth.
And Aaron, this will continue to be a large scene, a federal crime scene, as the FBI has taken over the lead here of the number of law enforcement agencies that are here, including the ATF, that's bringing traces on the weapons that were used in this assault in this very dense neighborhood in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., Reagan Washington National Airport, just a couple of miles away, the Capitol itself, where many of these members, or all of these members, served the United States Congress just only about 8 miles away. And as they were practicing here just a few hours ago, those gunshots rang out. We're hearing about the heroic act of those law enforcement, that security detail of the majority whip who jumped into action to not only surround him, but to protect the members of Congress, House of Representatives, senators who were out here, those legislative aides, their families who were out here enjoying the morning before it really heated up here in Washington as far as the temperature goes. And so there are folks here and eyewitnesses who were starting to really grasp the magnitude of what happened out here. Obviously, at this point, we know that the only life lost was that of the gunman. And as so many people pray and think about the victims, the innocent lives that were injured out here, this nation will think about what happened on this baseball field, and there will be a greater conversation as we pray for the individuals who are recovering from their gunshots. But at this point, Aaron, the investigation goes on. Police are trying to figure out the motive of this James Hodgkinson from Illinois. Why did he come here? Why did he pick today? And why did he pick these members of Congress to target? That will all be in the scope of the investigation as we try to learn more throughout the day.
ABC's Kenneth Moton on scene in Alexandria, Virginia, where Congressman Steve Scalise, the Republican Majority Whip, was shot and wounded in the hip. He has been through surgery and said to be in stable condition. You heard President Trump today say that he will make a full recovery. The congressman was well enough to speak by phone to his wife from the hospital. We also know that at least one other person was in critical condition. We're not sure who it was, whether it was a legislative aide in a congressional office, Zach Barth, or whether it was a lobbyist, Matt Micah, who works now for Tyson Foods, but used to be on the Hill as a staffer for Congressman Vito Fossella of New York, a Republican from Staten Island. Two Capitol Police officers, a David Bailey and a Crystal Griner, were shot and wounded. They were said to be in good condition, and they were the ones who initially confronted the suspect, James T. Hodgkinson, after he opened fire with a rifle and some kind of a handgun. It was the Capitol Police who traded fire first with the suspect, joined 3 minutes later by Alexandria Police, who arrived following calls to 911 from those who lived near the park and saw and heard the gunfire. The Capitol Police officers involved were apparently shot and still engaging the suspect with gunfire, perhaps even chasing him down. He had approached the field from the third base side. The Capitol Police officers who were there providing protection for the Republican whip had been on the first base side, and there were bullets all over the infield dirt and the outfield, and processing that scene goes on, as do the recovery of the victims. I'm Aaron Katersky. You've been listening to live coverage from ABC News.